Chapter 9:35. The lights shone down from the high ceiling of the venue. The figure opposite him was neither tall nor strong, and had nothing to do with the word burly. He just stood there quietly, like a young student in a daze under a tree on campus, ordinary and inconspicuous. But because the figure was similar to the one he hated and feared the most, Tian Xingtian's mood suddenly became extremely bad. With a gloomy face, he lifted the ropes and listened to the starting bell. He walked to the opposite side, ready to tear him into pieces. The figure moved at the same time, taking a step forward in a very normal manner. His knees were slightly bent, and there was a very close distance between his two legs. He made a somewhat strange posture, as if there was an invisible rope tied between his knees. Tian Xingtian roared, raised his right arm like a stone tablet, and unreasonably smashed toward the opponent's head without any fancy moves. For a real master like him, any close-range combat skills were fake. Only strength was the most powerful weapon. The ordinary-looking man standing opposite him obviously had a different fighting philosophy. His feet brushed against the table at an extremely high frequency, and his right hand strangely came out from under his armpit, stabbing forward like a sharp military knife. This was the third and last match, which would determine the winner of the boxing match and the final outcome of the month of blood and fire in Bermuda. However, the two people in the ring were not aware of this. They were not nervous, and even did not take it seriously. They walked into the ring full of confidence and made the first move in a simple and even casual manner. What sent chills down one's spine was the scene that happened after that. In the end, it only confirmed that Tian Xingtian's confidence was laughable. This battle-hardened deputy commander of the Small-Eyed Special Forces was known as the third strongest fighter in Philadelphia. When he stepped on the ring, he showed the demeanor of a strong fighter. However, after his first action, he could only do this action forever. His shoulders sank slightly, and just as he raised his strong right arm, he didn't have time to draw the bow and shoot. The ordinary man opposite him had already swept in front of him like a silent bolt of lightning, and then a torrential storm hit him. Meng Qi's fingers struck Tian Xingtian's ribs viciously. He raised his elbow slightly and struck horizontally. Meng Qi took another step forward and struck Tian Xingtian's inner thigh with his knee. His left fist came out of nowhere and smashed into Tian Xingtian's face like a hammer. That ordinary and inconspicuous figure silently arrived. His fingers were like a gale, and his fists were like a shower. His movements were extremely fast, and every movement was so precise that it was beyond the imagination of a normal person. He was more like a machine. This storm of fists and fingers came too fast, so fast that many people felt that their eyes were blurred. It was as if when the ordinary man stepped forward with his right foot, his left elbow and every part of his body launched an attack at the same time. In less than a second, the ordinary-looking man seemed to have sprouted dozens of arms in an instant. They loosened at the same time and landed densely on Tian Xingtian's face, abdomen, and the tip of his nose. Tian Xingtian was indeed very strong, but in the face of such a terrifying attack, he could not react at all. He could only raise his right arm in vain, his eyes wide open in fear. A more accurate description of the situation would be, the third most powerful man in Philadelphia, Tian Xingtian, was beaten senseless by an ordinary man. Put, 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 put. A series of crisp sounds, like the sound of firecrackers, were extremely rhythmic. However, because they were so dense, most people only heard a single syllable explode. The ordinary-looking man retracted his foot and stood calmly with his hands behind his back. In front of him, Tian Xingtian was still maintaining his raised arm posture. However, this posture now looked so ridiculous and pathetic. He was like a performance artist who took off his clothes to play the role of a statue, only to realize that his lower body was not majestic. Thus, he felt ashamed. Before he could express his shame and anger with tears or expressions, Tian Xingtian's stiff body suddenly collapsed like a statue that had its bottom pulled out. His strong body fell to the ground with the sole of his feet as the axis. His body landed heavily on the surface of the ring, making a muffled sound. The force that had smashed into his body like a torrential storm was finally completely released with this collision. The clothes on his body curled up like burning pieces of paper, and then burst apart piece by piece, turning into butterflies fluttering in the air. Tian Xingtian's clothes were torn apart. His naked body was bruised and swollen. His broken nose was bleeding like a bloody peach. He tried his best to open his eyes that were swollen like peaches, but he could only open two small slits to look at the face in the shadow above him. He did not see the face clearly, but he saw the pair of small eyes that had turned into a nightmare. Furthermore, the small eyes of the other party were definitely not the result of being beaten up. Tian Xingtian's throat made a sound. He looked at the other party in horror and cried like a madman, "It's you! It's you! It's you again!" With the last of his strength, the third most powerful man in Philadelphia could not hold on any longer and fainted. The light from the ceiling still shrouded the ring. Although it was dim, it was quiet. It was as if they did not see the frightening scene from before. Or rather, they did not have time to see the scene clearly because everything happened too quickly. The venue was dead silent. Hundreds of people looked at the ring with an expression of disbelief. Many of them did not even see what happened before they realized that everything was over. The ordinary-looking figure stood quietly on the ring like a student. His hands were hanging on both sides of his body, as if he did not make a move at all. However, not far in front of him, the horrible body of the Philadelphia fighter proved everything. The last round ended even faster than the second round. The difference in strength between the two parties could no longer be described as overwhelming. In front of the ordinary-looking man, Tian Xingtian was like a scarecrow that was tied up tightly. This one-sided and extremely humiliating battle was more like an angry parent teaching a disobedient child a lesson. There was still a deathly silence. Everyone stared dumbfoundedly at that inconspicuous figure, guessing in their hearts who he was. In the box on the top floor of the venue, Li Wei looked at the figure in the middle of the ring with excitement. His hands were tightly holding the railing, and his veins were visible. He thought that he would lose this fight and that he and the orphan gang were only left with death, so he made the decision to die together with them. When he made the decision, he was full of sadness and was not afraid. However, now the situation had changed abruptly. How could he not be excited when he did not have to die? How could he not be excited when he saw the figure that he had grown up with and had not seen for years? In the opposite box, the slightly fat face of Mr. Descartes looked particularly gloomy under the dim light. He angrily threw away the red wineglass in his hand, pointed at Tian Xingtian, who was in the ring below, and asked coldly, "What's going on? Didn't he say that he was the third most powerful man in Philadelphia? How could he be beaten into a pile of mud? What a waste!" The subordinate officer next to him wiped the cold sweat and explained in a trembling voice, "It seems that Lieutenant Colonel Tian's enemy is really powerful. I don't know where he found him." Descartes looked at Ji Hua and several members of the Bermuda Conference in front of him and said in a deep voice, "Who can give me an explanation?" They thought that it was just a formality of a fight, but it suddenly developed to this point. The huge benefits that they were about to get suddenly turned into a bubble. The local tycoons in the box were shocked and furious, but in the face of the Federation's government representative, no one dared to show it. Ji Hua looked at the figure in the ring with an ugly expression and said, "According to the intelligence, Li Wei spent money to invite a master of harmonization of energy from Li Mingxing. It's absolutely impossible for him to be Lieutenant Colonel Tian's opponent, let alone be so powerful." He hesitated for a moment and then suggested, "Mr. Descartes, it seems that this matter needs to be considered in the long run. We first have to find out who the person in the ring is." Descartes frowned and did not speak. Suddenly, he said in a deep voice, "Everything must be finished tonight. If you don't have the confidence to eliminate those wandering ghosts on the opposite side, my special forces can join the battle this time." Ji Hua was shocked and hurriedly tried to persuade him, "Mr. Descartes, you probably don't know the rules of Bermuda. This bet has been notarized and we are willing to—" Before he could finish the words, Descartes indifferently waved his hand and cut him off. He said in an indisputable tone, "There are no rules in front of the Federation government. His Excellency the President wants you to do it as soon as possible. You must do it immediately." In the dim box, the tycoons of the Bermuda Conference looked at each other in silence. They could see the anger in each other's eyes, as well as a lot of helplessness. Descartes leaned on the railing and looked at the figure in the ring. He cruelly mocked, "I don't know if you can still be so cool when you are shot to death." Just as he said this, the ordinary-looking man in the ring raised his head. He looked in the direction of the box on the top floor and shook his head. He had been slightly lowering his head since he walked into the ring. Even when he was carrying out a terrifying attack, he still maintained this posture. At this time, when he raised his head, the direct light from the ceiling fell on his face for the first time. The soft and dim light illuminated the face that could not be called handsome, reflecting the clear and firm lines of the face and the pair of small eyes. This face was very ordinary and had no special features. However, when matched with the pair of small eyes, it became the most famous face in human society. The venue, which was in a depressing silence, became even more silent than before when the light illuminated this face. Then, there was a tsunami-like exclamation. The gambler patted his head in shock and roared, "It's that man!" The waitress covered her mouth in disbelief and shock, trying not to scream. More people exclaimed with mixed emotions, "It's Sulu! Why did he come to Bermuda?" Descartes stood by the railing of the box and looked at the face under the light of the ring. He clearly saw the other side shaking his head at him. His body suddenly stiffened. The cruel smile on his face had long disappeared, leaving only endless panic. Chapter 936. Hearing the exclamations of the crowd, hearing the name spurting out of countless crimson or pale lips, and then penetrating into his ears like a thunderclap, Descartes' body that had been extremely stiff a moment ago suddenly softened. He almost fell to his knees while leaning against the railing. The arm that gripped the railing tightly prevented the high-ranking federal official from doing something so embarrassing. However, the incessant trembling of his arm indicated that the fear in his heart had already surged endlessly like the dark clouds of the dawn star. There was dead silence in the box. He suddenly turned around and stared at the people in the box with crazy eyes. He waved his arms and screamed, "Kill him! No matter what method you use, kill him!" The people in the box understood and sympathized with Mr. Descartes' loss of composure, because their situation was not much better. After confirming the identity of the man standing in the ring, not many people had the strength to stand up from their chairs. They were the leaders of Bermuda, but that man was a legend on the battlefield, and now he was obviously on Li Wei's side. Fortunately, they were far less dangerous than Mr. Descartes. The whole universe knew that the person the Federation government did not want to see the most in these years was the small-eyed man named Sulu in the ring. This bloody war in Bermuda had entered the final stage, and they were about to win, even if it was a despicable victory. Was it going to end because of the appearance of that man in the ring? Countless things had happened in the past 10 years, so the big shots in the box knew how terrifying Su Li's combat strength and tenacity were. They were even willing to admit that they, who had countless subordinates, did not have the courage to fight this man. However, the situation was like this, and they had to fight. Ji Hua frowned and thought quickly. In his calculations, no matter how strong Su Lu was, he was still a normal person. The local armed forces of Bermuda and the support of the Federation government should have more than a 90% chance of winning. As the most famous arms smuggler in this star field, Ji Hua had a ruthless heart that the other big shots in the Bermuda Conference did not have. He glanced at his partner who was still hesitating, looked at Descartes and said in a deep voice, "Please give me the command of your special forces, and I promise to kill that man." The panicked expression on Descartes' face relaxed a little as he heard Ji Hua's words. He praised in a trembling voice, "I'll leave everything to you, Mr. Ji Hua." Ji Hua was no longer as flattering, and Descartes was no longer as arrogant and contemptuous. This was no longer the nightclub of the manor, but a venue where Su Lu was present. Just as Ji Hua was about to stand up and prepare for battle, he suddenly noticed a small red dot appearing under the railing beside him. Then the second red dot, the third red dot. The red light spot was very dim and weak. If one didn't pay attention, they wouldn't be able to notice it in the dim environment of the room. However, if someone were to look closer, they would be able to see that there were two very small ancient letters in the center of the red light spot. As if, like red ants, 3 dim red dots of light quietly entered the room through the wall. They crawled on the sofa and on the bodies of the big shots who did not notice them. They moved smoothly and nimbly, leaving no trace behind. Ji Hua, who was about to get up, saw the red light and sat back down in his chair, dejected. Cold sweat instantly seeped out of his forehead, and his whole body was filled with fear. There were at least 3 modified sniper rifles aimed at the room he was in. He had seen these red dots that looked like red ants and knew that they were the laser calibration points of some kind of modified sniper rifle. He didn't need to look carefully to know that at the center of the red dots, there must be the 2 ancient letters XF. He even knew that the laser calibration points of this modified sniper rifle could be adjusted to the point where they could be seen with the naked eye. This meant that the snipers outside didn't care about being discovered by the people in the room and were confident that they could control the situation. Ji Hua was able to see this not only because he was the biggest arms smuggler in Bermuda, but because he was the only one in the entire universe who had sold this kind of gun. The modified sniper rifle that Ji Hua called TP was the most advanced sniper rifle he had ever seen in his long career as an arms dealer. Other than not being on par with the legendary ACW, it was enough to look down on all similar equipment. TP was not the standard gun of the Federation or the Empire. It came from a mysterious seller. It was a very honorable thing to be able to obtain the exclusive rights to sell this kind of gun, but unfortunately, Ji Hua didn't dare to show it off in the past 2 years. This was because he had paid the painful price of the explosion of 3 smuggling spaceships. Those lessons were too unforgettable. However, he was so scared now, not only because he was targeted by 3 TP-modified sniper rifles, but also not because of those lessons. It was because only he knew that those guns were sent to the West Woods, to the old mansion in the Wei 2 district that Su Lu came to Bermuda, and the little princess of the Zhong family should have followed him to Bermuda. Ji Hua stared at the 3 red dots under his feet and thought to himself, could it be that the Westwood Special Forces have surrounded the venue? Because of this fearful speculation and the fear of the mysterious supplier of the TP-modified sniper rifle, Ji Hua, who was prepared to join hands with the Federation government to eliminate Su Lu, subconsciously looked at the 3 red dots and raised his hands. The thoughts in his mind were completed in an instant. The big shots in the room didn't know what kind of struggle he had gone through in his heart. They frowned and asked a few questions when they saw him raise his hands in a strange manner. Cold sweat slid down Ji Hua's cheeks. The next moment, he realized that raising his hands in advance to surrender was a wise choice. In the darkest corner of the dim room, 2 faces suddenly appeared in front of everyone like ghosts. One of them pointed a gun at Descartes and said softly, "Everyone, don't move." The room suddenly became tense. The big shots sitting on the sofa looked at the 2 gunmen who had somehow sneaked in. They were shocked and speechless. The door of the room was pushed open from the outside. The corridor light shone into the room and shone on the 2 gunmen. Only then did people realize that they were wearing dark black combat suits and their faces were painted with camouflage dark paint. They looked like real ghosts. In the soft and scattered corridor light, a wheelchair came in with the sound of a motor. A curly-haired man sat in the wheelchair. His face couldn't be seen clearly. Only a very thick shotgun could be seen on his lap. Behind the curtain of the sofa on the right side of the room, the small-eyed Special Forces member responsible for protecting Descartes quickly took out the gun at his waist and was ready to shoot when the light shone on the eyes of the 2 gunmen. The elite Special Forces member made the right choice. Unfortunately, he didn't see the 3 smoothly moving red dots and didn't know that there were snipers outside. A slight click came from somewhere on the opposite side of the ceiling. The TP sniper with a silencer fired from a long distance. The elite Special Forces member by the curtain suddenly bounced up and collapsed in the corner. A moment later, blood flowed out from under the sofa. The big shots were shocked by this scene of death. They tightly pursed their lips and sat still on the sofa with serious expressions. Everyone wanted to save face and didn't want to be controlled by others. However, no one dared to be arrogant in front of a sniper rifle. The 2 gunmen, who were as black as ghosts, did not seem to have seen the sniper bullet blowing up the small-eyed elite of the Special Forces. They walked around Descartes expressionlessly and occupied the corner with the largest view in the room. Holding the guns in their hands, they aimed at everyone as suppressive measures. "Who are you?" Descartes, with a pale face, stared at the wheelchair at the door. He looked at the man in the wheelchair whose face was even paler than his own and asked in a trembling voice. The young man in the wheelchair frowned slightly. His pale face was full of hatred. After a long silence, he replied, "Group 7 Da Vinci." Hearing the words Group 7, the atmosphere in the room became even more depressing. Descartes and the Bermuda tycoons didn't know what happened on the Mo Hua planet, so they didn't expect Group 7 to appear here. Sulu was already very scary. If there was Group 7, which was about to be forgotten but never really forgotten by the world, what would it mean? When Descartes recognized Sulu, he was about to go crazy. When he found that Group 7 was also acting with Sulu, he fell into despair. When people were in despair, it was easy to hallucinate. For example, at this moment, Descartes looked at the wheelchair in front of him, looked at the weak curly-haired man in the wheelchair, looked at the gun on the man's knee, and realized that the two gunmen behind him didn't pay attention to him at all. If he rushed over to grab the gun, restrained the weak man, and threatened Sulu and Group 7, he should be able to survive. But why was there such a good opportunity? Was this an illusion? No, he opened his eyes wide to confirm that this was not an illusion. This was his last hope. Descartes trembled and howled. Like a housewife rushing to the supermarket in the morning to buy limited-time bean pods, he suddenly pounced on the wheelchair. Da Vinci in the wheelchair seemed to have expected this high-ranking Federation official to do this. Just as Descartes' howl was squeezed out of his throat, he quickly picked up the gun on his knee with both hands and pulled the trigger without even aiming. A loud boom resounded. The room was filled with the smell of burnt flesh. Descartes' body was sprayed by hundreds of graphite balls fired at close range. He was blown back several meters by the violent force contained in the balls at high speed and heavily hit the railing. Like a broken bamboo, with a crisp crack, Descartes, who came to carry out the president's secret mission, died. His chest and abdomen were a mess. At this time, no one knew if he still remembered the manner and the beautiful woman that the Bermudians gave him, or if he regretted it. The wheelchair came to the front of Descartes' body. Da Vinci spat and looked at the body and said, "I gave you hope, then made you despair. I am playing with you. Let's see if you idiots dare to play with me again." The room was silent. When the leaders of the Bermudian Conference, who were known for their ruthlessness, saw this scene, they didn't have any expression on their faces, but their hearts were extremely cold. Only now did they know that Group 7 was actually so ruthless. Chapter 937. Bermuda was a place where one needed to be ruthless in order to survive and grow stronger. At this time, among the big shots sitting in the private room, which one of them was not a first-class ruthless person who was not ruthless and treated ruthlessness as their livelihood? However, when they saw Da Vinci, who was in a wheelchair, kill Descartes with a single shot, they were shocked like never before. They also saw that the three members of Group 7 in the private room had deliberately left an opening for Descartes to give him the illusion that he could escape before firing the shot. These big shots of Bermuda were expressionless, but they had long been anxious. They often saw and even did things like killing people without blinking an eye. But before killing, they had to play with the other party like a cat hunting a mouse. They had to lure the other party into a state of hope and then cruelly drag the other party into despair. Even they couldn't bear it. Da Vinci withdrew his gaze from Descartes' body and glanced at everyone in the room with a blank expression. The big spear in his hand moved slowly with his gaze, and the black muzzle was full of murderous intent. No one took the lead or signaled. The big shots in the box did not hesitate to raise their hands to surrender. Their movements were so uniform. Their hands were so high, and their willingness to surrender was so full. In the past, these big shots would never make such a humiliating gesture in front of a soldier they looked down on. They had a sniper rifle outside and 2 guns behind them. Even if they surrendered, they would tidy up their clothes, wear an elusive smile on their faces, and slowly say their willingness to compromise. But at this time, they had experienced too many big events and seen too much blood. They knew how dangerous the curly-haired young man in the wheelchair was at this moment. Because of the rules, none of their subordinates entered the venue with guns, so they had no right to bargain or even pretend to be cool. Don't be nervous. This is a personal grudge between us and the Federation government. As the calm voice sounded, Sulu walked into the box. He narrowed his eyes and looked at Descartes' body under the railing. He didn't show any emotion on his face. He looked at the big shots on the sofa with their hands raised and nodded. If they didn't need to be nervous, then in the joke collection passed down by the ancestors of Li Shaoshan, the owner of the department store in the foothill of the Federation, there would be a famous scene missing, and the students in the exam room would smile a lot more. In fact, when they heard the second half of Su Li's sentence, the expressions of the Bermuda leaders with their hands raised suddenly became very interesting, and the nervousness in their hearts increased a little. This is a personal matter between us and the Federation government. In a literal sense, personal grudges naturally referred to grudges that happened between individuals. The focus was on the individual. For example, so-and-so was jealous of so-and-so. For example, Li Pifu cut off Xiao so-and-so's source of wealth. For example, Wei so-and-so and Shimin so-and-so raped so-and-so's wife and daughter. For example, Li Pifu killed the emperor's master. This kind of gratitude and grudges began to ferment layer by layer until they could not live under the same sky. What would it mean if the object of this term was not a person, but the government of the Federation? This was equivalent to saying that Su Lu and Group 7 viewed the entire Federation government as one person. As long as the government didn't collapse, this grudge would never end. This was an arrogant and decisive declaration of war. The people in the box were shocked by the hidden valiance in this sentence, and then they immediately felt relieved. If they were to evaluate who had the qualifications and courage to declare war on the entire Federation, then Su Lu and his Group 7 would undoubtedly rank first. In fact, this small-eyed man had already done so 3 years ago. Ji Hua's focus was elsewhere. After a moment of observation, he confirmed that there should be no Westwood Special Forces inside or outside the venue that he feared the most. Naturally, he speculated that the reason why the snipers of Group 7 outside had TP-modified sniper rifles was because of the inseparable bridge between Su Lu and the Westwoods, the little princess of the Zhong family. Feeling a little more relaxed, he slowly put down his hands, looked at the other party, and said calmly, "Colonel Su Lu, I don't know if I can call you that." Su Lu nodded. "I don't know why you're interfering in Bermuda's internal affairs, but I think you should know the rules of Bermuda." Ji Hua frowned and said, "If there was a war, there wouldn't be today's boxing match. Since it was decided that the boxing match would decide the outcome, then we have to follow the rules. I respect you and your team, and I hope you can respect the traditions of Bermuda." Su Lu replied, "As an outsider, I respect the rules of Bermuda very much, so we sent people to fight in the boxing match. I even participated in it myself." Looking at the body of Descartes next to the railing and the gun of the small-eyed man in the distance, he continued, "Unfortunately, after we won the boxing match according to the rules, some people didn't seem to want to follow the rules here. They carried guns, and the militants outside the venue seemed to be gathering." He looked up at the Bermuda leaders on the sofa and said calmly, "Since some of you didn't respect the rules first, I don't need to respect them anymore." The Bermuda leaders in the box looked at each other and couldn't help but shake their heads with a bitter smile. The other party was obviously prepared and even had a sniper in the ambush. What could they say when the other party refused to let Descartes go? Su Lu continued, "There's one more thing. Although our target is the Federation government, because I have some relationship with Li Wei in the opposite box, I may have to inconvenience you this time." "Can I have a smoke?" Ji Hua asked. "Go ahead," Su Lu replied. Ji Hua took out a thick stick of tobacco with trembling fingers, lit it, and took a puff. He coughed twice and asked seriously, "I have a question. I have a question. The conference has set up 16 checkpoints and hundreds of guns in this area. How did you sneak in with guns?" Su Lu replied, "This is probably the difference between professionals and amateurs." Ji Hua put down the thick tobacco in his hand and forced a smile on his pale cheeks. He asked, "By inconvenience, do you mean to kill all of us? If this is a war in Bermuda, then I can tell you that this war is over and you are all beheaded." Su Lu calmly explained, "But this is just a tactical term. I never thought of killing all of you. Killing hostages has always been the stupidest choice. I just need you to leave with me and announce the end of the war. Capturing us or killing us will not end this war because not all members of the conference are present today. And on this planet, We still have many loyal subordinates who will avenge us. Ji Hua stared into Su Li's eyes and said, I know you are very strong, but you have too few people. You, or Li Wei, can't bear the anger of the entire conference after we die. This is the real reason why you don't kill. You can also understand it this way. My team is indeed too few. It is impossible for less than 10 people to kill all of your combat troops. After saying this, Su Li paused for a long time and quietly looked at the leaders of the Bermuda Conference on the sofa. When the air in the box was about to condense, he continued in a serious tone, but you know who I am. The room was silent. Everyone listened to his speech in silence. I dared to break into the conference with 6 team members and kidnap you. I dare to let you go. I'm not afraid of you going back on your words. You don't have to be afraid. If you suddenly go back on your words after the war is over, you may be able to capture Garth City, take away all of Lin Banshan's assets, and kill my friend Li Wei and his subordinates. But at that time, I will definitely kill all of you, including the members of the conference who are not present today. As long as one of you goes back on your words, I will kill you. Whether you hide in the most remote star region or find a backer like the Emperor of the Empire, I will find you and kill you. Of course, if I am already dead before then, these restrictions will naturally have no power, but before I die, Su Li said these words that made people feel inexplicably cold. His expression was calm and natural, but his mind suddenly remembered that when he left the Federation 3 years ago, he left a note to Li Xiaotong saying a similar threat. He smiled with emotion and said calmly to the leaders of the Bermuda Conference in front of him, please believe in my ability to keep my promises and fulfill them. These words hit the ground like a stone, splashing invisible dust and gravel into the ears of the leaders of the Bermuda Conference. They suddenly felt a little difficult to breathe, and their hearts began to beat faster. At this time, in their eyes, Su Li's ordinary face was particularly terrifying, and even his smile was particularly strange and bloodthirsty. The room was silent, and the sofa seemed to be about to be unable to withstand the torture of the pressure. In fact, it was just the trembling of the Bermuda Conference's leaders who were sitting on it that exposed their inner struggle. These leaders of the Bermuda Conference were ruthless and cunning, and they did not care about morality and promises. When they were forced into a desperate situation or the benefits were great enough, they dared to ignore the rules that had been passed down for thousands of years. However, they had to take this threat seriously because the person who spoke was Su Li. They were indeed unwilling, but in the face of such a simple and direct threat from Su Li, no matter how unwilling they were, in the end, they would probably become powder under the pressure of the round stone. A casual gust of wind would blow them away without a trace, just like the ashes of a person after death. The red leaf of S2, the little white flower of Ka Chifeng, the revenge from morning to night, the battle between one person and the Federation. Everyone in the world knew Su Li's temperament. They knew that this person would definitely do what he said he would do, and he would definitely do it, no matter how difficult or bumpy it was. On the iron-blooded road paved with hard stones by this small-eyed man, countless members of the Federation, generals, and princes of the Empire had died in his hands. The leaders in the box were the real big shots of the Bermuda Conference, but compared to the names that once shook the universe but now became ghosts, they were nothing. Chapter 938. In the dead silence, Su Li suddenly looked at Ji Hua and said with a smile, actually, we have dealt with each other before. You should know my habits. Ji Hua was confused. Since he took over the business, he had been smuggling all kinds of firearms. The people he dealt with were either gang leaders or organizations that couldn't be exposed, but he didn't remember meeting them. Su Li reminded him, there are 3 ships that disappeared. Ji Hua's expression suddenly stiffened. The thick cigarette that had been burning between his fingers fell to the ground with a bang. He stared at Su Li's face, speechless. As the only distributor of the TP sniper rifle, no one knew how tempted Ji Hua was when he saw this batch of goods. There was even one time when he was tempted by the little red dots and tried to swallow 10 boxes of sniper rifles for himself or sell them to the Federation or the Empire at a high price. However, just as he was preparing to carry out this matter, the 3 most advanced arms smuggling ships under his command suddenly exploded for no reason and turned into ashes in the dark universe. The furious Ji-ho conducted a detailed investigation of this matter and confirmed that there were no outsiders mixed into the 3 ships from the dock to the departure. So, why did these 3 ships explode? At this time, an email from the mysterious supplier of the TP sniper rifle revealed all the answers. The supplier indifferently reminded him that if a similar situation happened again, it wouldn't just be 3 ships that exploded. The mysterious and unimaginable ability of the other party made Ji-ho extremely cautious and honest in the subsequent TP smuggling projects. It wasn't until this moment that he realized that the mysterious supplier was actually related to Sulu. Ji-ho picked up the thick cigarette from his feet and pressed it into the ashtray to crush it. He looked up at Sulu and said with a hoarse voice, "I agree with your suggestion." The fiercest and most unruly firearms tycoons had already expressed their submission. The Bermuda tycoons, who had long been shocked by Su Li's words, no one jumped out to express their bravery and fearlessness. "If no one has any objections, please leave with us to find a quiet place. You can discuss with Li Wei how this war should end in a dignified manner and related details." Su Lu explained, "We are outsiders. The negotiation is between you and Li Wei or Lin Banshan." After saying this, he went to the wheelchair, turned it around, and pushed Leonardo out of the room. A heavy military backpack was hanging from the corner of the wheelchair. Inside it were a dozen or so federal military metal identity tags. The owners of these metal tags had all been buried in the smoke and conspiracy of Mo Hua Planet. The wheelchair slowly rolled over Descartes' corpse. Da Vinci coldly glanced at the corpse and calmly placed the big flower spear on his knees. Da Vinci's closest and most loyal team members had all been sacrificed when the 2 NTR camps were ambushed by the special forces of Small Eyes. Although he had managed to keep his life in the Southwest war zone, the spaceship's medical cabin had not been able to save his 2 legs. He had been forced to amputate them, and there were even some terrible sequelae. Su Lu patted him on the shoulder and didn't say anything. Everyone knew that Descartes was Pabre's loyal dog. In this operation, everyone had deliberately left him for Pabre to kill because everyone knew that the person who hated the government the most was him in the wheelchair. The corridor was crowded with people. The people who seemed to have disappeared earlier suddenly rushed in. Those bodyguards who didn't carry guns or secretly carried a few guns watched their boss being escorted out by the members of Group 7. They didn't dare to make any big moves. As the wheelchair was pushed forward, under the 2 black barrels, several Bermuda heroes silently followed. The crowd in the corridor subconsciously separated to 2 sides. It was like the waves were separated by magic. It wasn't spectacular, but it left a deep impression. At the end of the corridor stood Li Wei and his members of the orphan gang. Those orphans and youths, who were known for being ruthless and fearless, looked at the men walking towards them. They smelled the distinct scent of the iron-blooded military camp on them. There was no longer any indifference and cruelty on their faces, only doubt and vigilance. They helped the orphan gang win the boxing match in the ring, and then captured the leaders of the conference. No matter how they looked at it, they should be their friends. They came to help them, but why did they help them? These men, who were obviously from the military, could easily sneak into the venue with guns and capture those terrifying heroes. The strength they showed was too terrifying. It was so terrifying that the orphan gang was full of anxiety. Only the ignorant could be fearless, and only the unloved could be fearless. The orphan gang was able to hold on for a month in this war and force the Bermuda Conference into a deadlock because of this temperament. But at this time, they knew that the small-eyed man who was pushing the wheelchair forward was Su Lu, so they were afraid and vigilant. People in the underworld had infinite respect for this name, but he was from the Empire. Then, were the men around him the legendary Imperial Royal Special Forces? What if the other party suddenly turned hostile and wanted to occupy Bermuda? At this time, the orphan gang was shocked to find that their leader, Li Wei, didn't seem to see the black barrels of the other party at all. He also ignored the warning glances of the people next to him and just walked forward. Su Lu let go of the hand that was pushing the wheelchair. The 2 opened their arms and hugged silently, patting each other's back hard to show how much they missed each other. There were many cars, armed men, and powerful guns outside the venue, but Su Lu and his team didn't seem to see them at all. They silently boarded the car and drove to the southern suburbs of Garth City. The Bermuda leaders waved their hands to signal their subordinates to stay calm. After making a few phone calls, they followed Li Wei's team to another place. Not accepting the orphan gang's arrangement, Su Lu and his team members chose a hotel in the southern suburbs of Garth City and slept soundly for the night. Zhong Huayan was on the spaceship and was taken care of by Philip. Although most of the people in Bermuda knew that they were coming, they weren't too worried because of the scene in the venue. The next morning, Su Lu woke up, washed up, and had a simple breakfast. He then went to the window and looked at the bleak scenery on the streets and the scenery of a foreign land. The door was pushed open. Su Lu looked at Li Wei's haggard and tired face and said with a smile, "A night of negotiation is more difficult for you than a month of war. I really don't understand why you insist on that dream. When we were young, we saw the gangs in Zhonglo Street. Who needs to negotiate every day?" Li Wei frowned and walked over. He took the teacup from Li Wei's hand and drank 2 mouthfuls. He then handed over a stack of documents and said, "Although we have been arguing about the details for a long time and the medical fees and compensation are a headache, there are basically no major problems. We have agreed to withdraw our troops immediately today." "What is this?" Su Lu looked at the documents in his hand and asked. "The armistice agreement. The other party requires you to sign it. Although I'm the one in charge of the negotiations and we're talking about Brother Mid-Mountain's property, it's obvious that if you don't sign your name, those old guys won't believe it at all." Su Lu smiled, took the carbon pen, and signed his name. After drying the handwriting, Li Wei took the documents and walked out of the room. When he reached the door, he suddenly stopped and looked at Su Lu in silence. After a long time, he sighed and said, "I didn't expect to see you again in this life. We are still young. As long as we don't die, we will see each other again. I will immediately send someone over to change your accommodation." Li Wei waved the ceasefire agreement in his hand and said with a smile, "When I come back, if you are well rested, I will take you around. This is now my city. Look at your smelly face." Su Lu shook his head. When he heard the word, around, he was tempted. He had been to Bermuda 3 years ago, but he had never had the opportunity to walk around this strange star field. After thinking for a while, he contacted Philip. "You and Little Watermelon come down and play." At around 10 o'clock, Su Lu and his team members changed hotels. Xiong Linquan and the others were taken care of by the admiring youngsters of the orphan gang, while he was dragged out by Li Wei without hesitation. The expensive silver Phantom slowly drove on the street. Su Lu curiously looked at the street through the window. The spaceship arrived at Pop Star 2 nights ago, and after landing on the surface, he had been collecting information and preparing for battle. He did not have the opportunity to take a good look at the strange buildings. The architectural style of Bermuda was different from that of the Federation and the Empire. Although it was somewhat similar to the Federation, there was also a big difference. The appearance of each building was very different, and the lines were particularly strange. If one wanted to praise it, it could be said that it was very artistic. If one did not like it, it could be said that it was very deformed. From the southern part of the city to the suburbs, gun holes and bullet marks could be faintly seen on the streets. Because of the war that had lasted for many days, it was full of killing intent. However, in the depths of the side alleys, there was a clear smell of alcohol, mucus, and the like. Su Lu was used to the smell of chaos that was deeply rooted in the flesh of the city. Just like every time he went to the port, his mood would become a little impetuous. Fortunately, the place to drink was very simple and quiet. This was a barbecue stall. It was not open during the day, but when the Silver Phantom, which had become like a protective talisman of Ska City, stopped at the stall, the sleepy boss and the servants immediately showed boundless enthusiasm and excitement on their faces. They quickly set up a small square table on the side of the street. Su Lu and Li Wei had known each other since they were young. When they were young, they mingled together in Zhonglo Street and those mines. Their relationship no longer required any pleasantries. All that was needed was 2 bottles of wine and a few words. "Do you still remember what my dream was when I was young?" Li Wei raised his neck and poured a cup of colorless and transparent liquor into his stomach. The heart-piercing burning sensation instantly stimulated his face to glow. Of course I remember. You wanted to become the fiercest black boss in Heshi province. Su Lu unhurriedly picked up a piece of pig's ear with his chopsticks and slowly chewed it. Then he lifted the wine cup and sipped it. Although it was slow, the cup was still emptied. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about your earliest dream. Su Lu stared blankly. Then, a nostalgic smile appeared on his face. You wanted to stew all the beef from the black market at 6th Zheng's stall. If you love me, you can hug me. If you love me, you can kiss me. But this rule is restricted to girls, regardless of age. Chapter 939. Li Wei also laughed, his fingers rubbing the greasy wine glass. His face was full of nostalgia as he said emotionally, yes, this was my original dream. I like Bermuda. Other than the fact that it's simpler than the Federation and the rules of reason with fists, the food here is more to my liking. You like meat, I like meat too. In fact, I found that as long as you're human, who doesn't like meat? Of course, I'm talking about the real kind of meat. Li Wei drank a glass of wine and narrowed his eyes as he reminisced about the past. When I was kidnapped by the Tai family and brought to Bermuda, life was actually pretty good. They didn't mistreat me much, but they refused to give me meat. They probably didn't remember that the young captive was actually not afraid of death. What he was afraid of was not being able to taste meat in a place like Bermuda where he could eat as much as he wanted. He pointed at the house opposite the barbecue stall and said with a smile, I was there at that time, smelling the barbecue smell every day. Back then, in order to threaten Su Lu, the Madam of Macho's back mountain kidnapped Li Wei from Donglin to Bermuda. For Li Wei, who had never experienced any real danger and lived in the remote Donglin, he could imagine what kind of soul-stirring experience and what kind of painful memories it was. Su Lu raised his glass and drank it. He had never asked about the details of what happened back then. As a brother, he didn't need to ask. The first time we met at the Federation, you treated me to a barbecue in Wangdu. It tasted good, but it was a pity that there wasn't any real meat. Li Wei wrinkled his nose and sniffed the barbecue smell behind him. He said, I've never forgotten the smell of this barbecue stall, especially the roasted lamb leg. When I was locked up at that time, I could even hear the sizzling sound of the lamb leg dripping with oil every night. At this moment, the smell of roasted lamb leg and the clear sizzling sound of oil coming from the barbecue stall behind the small table made the two look at each other and smile. Li Wei wiped his mouth and said loudly, So when I came to Bermuda, the first thing I did was eat roasted lamb leg at this stall for a month. In the end, I vomited. The owner of the barbecue stall heard half of the conversation and deliberately complained, Master Wei, look at what you're saying. My barbecue leg of lamb is known as the best in the entire universe. Why would you vomit after eating it? A burst of pleasing and flattering laughter sounded around the barbecue stall. The smile on Li Wei's face gradually disappeared. He looked at Su Lu and said seriously, Did you hear that? I am no longer Li Wei, nor am I Brother Wei. I am Master Wei. Eating meat to my heart's content was my initial dream. Being a real mafia boss is my eternal dream. I've already completed the first one, and I've also completed more than half of the latter one. You interfered yesterday, and I can already see the success. I said in the car just now, this city is now mine. Su Li's thick eyebrows slowly furrowed. He put down the chopsticks in his hand and looked at Li Wei. He wanted to say something, but in the end, he didn't say anything. Li Wei looked at him angrily and scolded, I didn't sell drugs, I didn't force women into prostitution, and I didn't kill the innocent. You've been nagging like an old man since you were 3 years old. Now we're already 30 and you're still like this. You're so annoying. Su Lu scratched his head and laughed. What's so annoying about this kind of thing? The roasted leg of lamb was ready. Li Wei took the plate from behind and cut a piece for Su Lu. He then put a piece into his mouth. He frowned and resisted the urge to vomit. He swallowed a mouthful of wine and said vaguely, Be serious. Let's be serious. What I want to say is that my life dream has been fulfilled. I know you didn't have any life dreams since you were young, but now that you've made it this far, you must have a lot to do this time. If you need my help, you can't be polite with me. I have no regrets in life now. No regrets, do you understand? This means that I don't care about anything. It was a very crude and simple sentence, but it was definitely not a jerk. The atmosphere at the small square table was warm. Su-Lu looked at Li Wei, who was spitting saliva with his head lowered. He suppressed the emotions in his heart and asked with a smile, "You don't care that I'm from the Empire? You're a proper member of the Federation. You used to be a hero of the Federation, and I used to be a gangster. Did you care?" Li Wei looked up at him and asked seriously, "After you escaped from the Federation, I thought you would come to Bermuda to find me. I told you before that I would prepare a backup plan for you in Bermuda. Why didn't you come to find me?" Su-Lu was silent for a moment before he replied with a smile, "It's indeed inconvenient. I'm not lying to you. I'm now a proper prince of the Empire." "Fuck," Li Wei said self-deprecatingly, "I knew it was because of this. I thought you would never see me again after you became the Emperor of the Empire. The Emperor also has a few poor relatives." Su-Lu deliberately mocked. Li Wei mocked back, "Even if you became the Emperor, you relied on your parents. Using the word you taught me when I was young, this can only be considered a genital revolution. I'm different from you. The orphan gang's territory was built by me. I admit that Big Brother Mid-Mountain only took a second look at me because of you, but I won't be polite with you on this matter." He raised his glass and said seriously, "My ability is really good. Although it's definitely not as good as yours, I still have a few tricks up my sleeve." Su-Lu understood what Li Wei meant. He knew that he would definitely have to return to the Federation to participate in that seemingly hopeless battle, so he wanted to help him. However, Su-Lu might accept this kind of help because Li Wei had his own subordinates who needed his protection. Hence, he changed the topic directly. "How have you been in Bermuda these past few years?" Li Wei understood what he meant and simply stopped talking about it. "Not bad. Bermuda is rich in resources. The biggest income is from smuggling to the Federation and the Empire. Irregular trade accounts for more than 90% of the annual income. The most important thing is the cargo route. Because of the war in the Left Sky Galaxy, Bermuda is now a little bleak." Li Wei pointed at the road they came from and explained, "When the war is over, you will see that this place is really lively, especially those cargo spaceships. The density of spaceships taking off and landing every day is so high that it's hard to believe. I know a little about the Federation's smuggling." Su-Lu took the knife and began to cut the rest of the roasted lamb leg. He asked, "There are many things I don't understand about the Empire's smuggling. Our Empire's crown prince is now traveling incognito and caring about the economic lives of his subjects?" Li Wei joked. "I've seen the smuggling ships of the Empire's nobles." Su-Lu put down the knife and gestured with his fingers. He frowned and said, "Those ships are very small and can't carry people at all. And before 72 years of the constitutional era, the Empire had no way to pass through the warp hole. How could they collect money from Bermuda's smugglers and complete such a transaction? Those ships are called shuttles. The probability of safely passing through the Gary corridor is very high." Li Wei put down the wine glass in his hand and shook his head. "You used to be a war hero of the Federation. Don't you know that the Empire has been sending small spaceships carrying the Royal Special Forces to force their way through the warp hole for decades?" Su-Lu spread his hands and said, "I do know about this. At that time, I only thought that this method was pushing the elites into a sea of fire. It was too tragic. Could it be that it has something to do with the smuggling on both sides? Even if they were pushing the Royal Special Forces into a sea of fire, after 70 years, there were always some lucky ones who survived. They didn't get crushed by the warp hole and escaped the glory of the Charter. In the end, these people all came to Bermuda." Su-Lu remembered that Group 7's main combat mission was to use an unofficial identity to fight against the smuggled Imperial Special Forces on the mineral stars in the Bermuda region. Madman Lee's first battlefield was also in these places. I don't know how many of the Empire's Royal Special Forces are in Bermuda. Some of them may have disguised themselves as coolies, while others may have become merchants, hiding on these planets. Li Wei looked at the buildings under the blue light and said, "There may be people from the Empire in this city. This barbecue stall owner might be one of them. I even suspect that there are people from the Empire among the leaders who didn't participate in the war. If you reveal your identity now and shout that I am the Empire's crown prince Su Lu on the street, maybe someone will immediately run out and kneel in front of you with their whole family. They will give you their decades of wealth and guns to pledge their loyalty to you." Su Lu smiled bitterly and filled the glass. More than 60 years ago, there was a former member of the Bermuda Conference who tried to renege on a huge deal. He had many loyal subordinates and powerful guns. He thought that since the Empire's fleet couldn't come over, why should he be afraid of you? What happened next? Su Lu asked with a frown. Later, this former leader was assassinated and finally died. It's that simple. Simple? Li Wei recalled the famous Bermuda story, shook his head, and sighed. Regardless of whether you were eating, visiting prostitutes, or having sex, dozens of Imperial Special Forces hidden in the city hunted you down day and night without regard for their lives. This went on for 3 whole years, and everyone had to die. Su Li's fingers that were holding the glass slightly stiffened. He couldn't help but feel a chill as he thought of the bloody and ruthless hunts of the past years. There were a few such stories in the old days, and the ending of each story was the same. The Empire didn't care how many hidden elites they lost. They just wanted to kill your whole family. Since then, although the smuggling trade between Bermuda and the Empire was still one-sided and unregulated, no one dared to renege on the deal anymore. As for the payment you asked about, because the currency is not universal, the transactions between the two sides are all about the exchange of goods, especially aircraft and related technologies. The Empire offers the highest price. Although Bermuda's standard in this regard is not as good as the Federation, it is better than the Empire. The Federation doesn't care. Many people in Bermuda have always suspected that Lin Banshan suddenly came to Bermuda to supervise this trade on behalf of the Federation. After the incident in February of that year, no one in Bermuda dared to go against his will, and then the import of aviation technology to the Empire completely stopped. Su Lu listened to this, and his eyes gradually narrowed. Chapter 940. Su Lu admired Lin Banshan very much. This admiration was not the kind of reverence that Lin Dohai and Nan Xiangshou had for the second generation of the 7 great families. Instead, it was a faint yearning for a certain kind of bearing that he could not possess. When he first saw the man with mountain-like shoulders in the high-speed train carriage at the first port, he was an ordinary technical director of the Nutshell Company. The other party had been a legend for more than 10 years and had single-handedly made a name for himself in the world. After a few years of occasional contact, he went from a technical director to a felon of the Federation to the successor of the army god. However, Lin Banshan was still Lin Banshan. There seemed to be no obvious difference between the two. But he had to admit that the man's aura seemed to be born naturally. Standing there, he was like a mountain. Just by looking at him from a distance, he could see his elegant demeanor. It was something that a mine-pit stone like him could never learn. At this time, when he heard the rumors from Bermuda, he couldn't help but think of a certain Federation rumor that Tai Ziyuan had once told him. Before the former director of the Bureau of Proclamation retired, his favorite candidate was not Cui Judong, who had been an assistant for many years, but Lin Banshan, who had no connection to the Bureau of Proclamation in the eyes of outsiders. Su Lu frowned, narrowed his eyes, and said thoughtfully, "The Federation can do whatever they want in a foreign land like Bermuda. Lin Banshan is really not simple." "Of course not." Li Wei looked at him and said seriously, "No matter how strong you are, even if you become the crown prince of the Empire, I can still treat you as a brother. But for someone like Lin Banshan, even if he wanted to treat me as a brother, I wouldn't dare. He seems to be born to be below others. For example, in a venue, even if he sits quietly in the last row, everyone will think that the last row is the front row. You have a very high opinion of him, and he is very artistic," Su Lu said with a smile. Li Wei shrugged, drank the wine in front of him, and said with emotion, "Because that person is very artistic." Bermuda often describes his vision as being dedicated to appreciating beauty in the universe. Don't you think this is sour? But this is really apartment. All the people of Bermuda, including the big shots you saw at the meeting yesterday, if they were to tell the truth, they would definitely believe that Lin Banshan is most suitable for the job. It's either the president of the Federation or the emperor of the empire. Su Lu gently held the wine glass and smiled. Could it be because of this temperament that Lin Banshan refused to be the director of the Bureau of Proclamation? Li Wei continued, but to him, being the president and emperor is the stupidest thing to do. There's no point in being responsible for the country and the people. It's not as comfortable as being the king of the underworld in Bermuda. Su Lu shook his head and said, everyone has their own responsibilities. Lin Banshan broke out of the family and became the rarest rebel of the 7 great families. He seemed to have no feelings for the family, but he still wanted to protect his useless younger brother. Now, he still wants to return to the Federation to fight the government on behalf of the family. Li Wei smiled and did not continue the topic. He said casually, now, Brother Banshan's son is still in Garth City. His favorite woman is called Li Feirong. Coincidentally, she has the same surname as me. A few days ago, she wanted to recognize me as her brother, but I refused. But do you want to see them? Su Lu replied, no, I'm here in Bermuda for business. Speaking of business, although the armistice agreement has been signed, those old guys in the meeting will definitely not dare to go back on their words in a short time. But what if the Federation government directly sends people over? Even if the charter states that they are dead, they can still think of other ways. I don't have the confidence to go against the federal army. A worried look appeared on Li Wei's face. Su Lu admitted that his worries were justified. The Federation's charter clearly stated that the government could not interfere in the internal affairs of Bermuda. However, the arrival of Descartes and the mercenaries under Nutshell showed that these restrictions were just a thin layer of fiber paper with no real binding force. That's why I'm here. He looked at Li Wei and said, after Lin Banshan left Bermuda, the biggest influence on this star field is not the Federation or the Empire, but the Westwoods. Li Wei vaguely guessed what he meant. He frowned and asked, in the past few years, many of the troops loyal to the Zhong family in the Westwoods have been transferred to the front lines. I also heard that the Capital Ring has been controlling the amount of strategic supplies and weapons. You should have heard of the Iron Fortune Teller. In the past 3 years, they have been secretly and openly supporting the Zhong family in the Westwoods. As long as they have money, it is possible. The basic equipment of the Westwoods military is still guaranteed. Of course, their current strength is definitely not as strong as when Commander Zhong was still alive, but it is not difficult to intimidate Bermuda. After a long silence, Li Wei sighed and said, that's good. Su Lu asked curiously, what's good? Abducting girls is great, especially abducting Silin's Zhong family's little princess for 3 years. That's the best thing. With just a few words, I can be sure that Silin's military will send troops over to support me. Li Wei shook his head and sighed. When I was in Wangdu, I saw her. She left a deep impression. That little girl is the first person I have ever seen in my life who has not seen pirated discs. She is indeed the little princess of the Westwoods Zhong family. He asked very seriously, I saw her before I left the hotel. The little girl has grown up and become very beautiful. When are you going to make your move? He looked very serious, but in fact he was very shameless. Su Lu glared at him. Li Wei shrugged indifferently, then looked at him seriously and asked, at such a tense time, you can't have appeared in Bermuda just to support me. In fact, before you came, you probably didn't know that I was in danger. What do you want to do? This time, there are 4 things besides the Westwoods. Su Lu frowned slightly, and after a moment of silence, he said, I want to find a way out for my brothers. Going to war with the Federation government is very dangerous. Once we fail, even if we are lucky enough to survive, my brothers in the team will no longer be able to find any foothold in the Federation. Bermuda is their only backup, their only way out. Speaking of this, he remembered that when they left Ink Flower Planet, in order to leave Paul and the 2 Imperial soldiers behind, the spaceship did not directly fly out of the atmosphere. When they landed at the Imperial headquarters, Xiong Linquan and the others' faces were very ugly. They can't go to the Empire. Su Lu looked at Li Wei and said, if that day comes, I will entrust all of Xiong Linquan's brothers to you. I hope you can treat them well. No problem. Li Wei replied with a smile. You know that one of the important reasons I came to Bermuda is to leave you a way out. Since you can't use it now, it's not a waste to let your brothers use it. Then he excitedly added, in the future, with a group of 7 men wandering the streets, who would dare to provoke me? I really want to advise you on this matter. Virtue. Su Lu said with a smile, the 4th reason is that I want to see you and see if this oldest friend of mine still has this virtue. Li Wei did not laugh. He noticed that Su Lu did not say the reason, but did not ask. He said in a deep voice, you seem to be saying your last words. It's inauspicious. In the past, when I was in the Federal Army, before 3320 went on a mission, before I went to kill Macklin, there were many times when I left my will like today. I even wrote 2 copies of my will. Su Lu smiled and continued, but I'm still alive now. I left the Empire on a ship, passed through the Gary Corridor, avoided the glory of the Charter, and came to your territory. I'm sitting in front of you alive, eating barbecue and drinking with you. He patted Li Wei on the shoulder and said seriously, it's really difficult for smelly and indestructible Eastwood mine pit stones like you and me to die. After the emotional hug with Paul on Mo Hua Planet, Su Lu and his sister, Huai Chaosher, had a conversation that no one knew about. In that conversation, the angry and disappointed princess sternly opposed Su Li's stupid decision to return to the Federation to fight for those outlanders and tried to use the most powerful means to turn this objection into reality. Su Li did not resist, but when Huai Chaosher's fist was about to hit his head, he said something very similar to the above sentence. He said it very sincerely, so sincerely that he felt that he was a stone that would not die. However, the edges of the white stones in the Eastwood mine pit would be weathered by time. The stones on the top of Cocky Peak would slowly collapse under the light of the stars in the vacuum. The hardest diamond would be worn out into a tacky appearance. It would be worn on the finger of a woman to show her pride and stubbornness. How could there be a stone that would exist forever in this universe? At the small square table of the barbecue stall, the brothers who had not met for a long time no longer repeated the seemingly firm and powerful conversation that was, in fact, too complicated and tasteless. They officially began to drink and compete in drinking. When they were tipsy, they began to recall bits and pieces of their childhood like old men. 4 ordinary men, 30 years old was the prime of their life. However, for Su Lu and Li Wei, they had come from the remote and desolate Eastwood mine pit to the starry sky. In just 30 years, they had experienced stories that ordinary people would never experience in their lifetime. They were still young and their mentality was not old, but the past suddenly became extremely distant. If they did not try to recall it, they were afraid that they would forget it. Why was the green hills of the Hushi region so beautiful? How could such a lush shrub grow on the barren red soil? Why were the stones in the depths of the mines so smelly? So much so that the Eastwood stone became synonymous with smelly and hard? This was all thanks to the Eastwood orphans who had been peeing all year round. The 2 drunk men helped each other out of the barbecue stall, walked into the alley, unzipped their pants, and began to pee in broad daylight. Li Wei drank until he vomited, but he insisted that it was because the roasted lamb leg was too fishy. Su Lu also drank until he vomited. He had never thought about whether the qi in his body could dissolve the alcohol. Even if it could, he would not bear to, because what he drank today was not just wine, of course, it was also not some damned loneliness, but the past. It was a very sour word, but that was what the 2 boys at the small square table of the barbecue stall thought. Every time they thought that they would never be able to return to the days when they were little boys, which man would not secretly feel sour in his heart. Both of them were in high spirits as they returned to the hotel. However, just as they entered the hotel lobby, a 15 or 16-year-old youth saw the drunk Li Wei and did not hide the disgust on his face. He frowned and reprimanded, "Why are you so drunk? You know what kind of situation you are in, but you are not cautious." The boy's clothes were simple but expensive, purely hand-sewn. It was obvious that his family was not ordinary. At this moment in Bermuda, he actually dared to treat Li Wei with such an attitude. That could not be described as simple. Su, who was drunk, did not see the boy's clothes clearly. This boy dared to be rude to Li Wei. His eyebrows slowly raised, but when he noticed the next scene, his thick eyebrows suddenly smoothed out, but his eyes narrowed. This was because he saw that the boy in front of him was holding a fair and delicate hand. Zhong Huiyan's small hand. Chapter 941. The young man reprimanded Li Wei with a sullen face. His tone was slow and he did not use any insulting words. However, Li Wei and his orphan gang were ruthless characters that no one in the city dared to underestimate. The young man was only 15 or 16 years old, yet he reprimanded them like this. The contempt was very clear. Li Wei had been at the bottom of society since he was young, and he had always maintained certain principles and refused to cross the line. He had always been more tolerant of women and children who did not know better. He respected the father of the boy in front of him very much, but this did not mean that he did not have a temper. When the leader of the orphan gang was reprimanded like this, he did not dare to lose his temper. He raised his head and stared at the boy in front of him. He gradually sobered up. His eyes were as bright and clear as when he was young, but there was no trace of emotion. At this moment, a charming young woman in her 30s hurried over. She saw the scene in front of her and her face suddenly changed color. She quickly stood in front of the boy and gave Li Wei an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry, Brother Wei. You know that children nowadays are really immature." Li Wei was silent for a moment and replied with a smile, "Sister Feirong is right." The boy was a little embarrassed to be reprimanded by his elder. Just as he was about to say something, he saw his aunt turn around and glare at him. Her eyes were cold and stern. As the woman who had been with Lin Banshan for the longest time, Li Feirong had never been able to become Lin Banshan's official wife. Now that she was old, she was not favored. However, her position in the hearts of the people of Bermuda was still very high. Li Feirong once again expressed her sincere apology to Li Wei. With her status, she did not need to do so. However, she was very clear that after Lin Banshan left Bermuda, the originally unknown leader of the orphan gang in front of her had sacrificed a lot for the safety of her and the boy beside her. He had sacrificed a lot to protect Lin Banshan's foundation. The adults present expressed their apologies and gratitude. They carefully repaired their relationship with each other to avoid affecting the overall situation. The boy's gloomy face was gloomy. His eyes were full of indifference as he looked coldly into the distance. No one noticed that Su Li's eyes narrowed. Only Zhong Huiyan noticed it. Dressed in a white dress, she was like an innocent and well-behaved princess, allowing the boy to gently hold her hand as if he was holding a treasure. Under her neat black bangs that were like watermelon skin, there was a cunning light in her eyes. She carefully and joyfully paid attention to Su Li's expression. When Su Lu narrowed his eyes, it meant that he felt extreme danger or made a great decision. His enemies would often sense his determination from this small action and feel the cold danger. At this moment, his raised eyebrows fell and his eyes narrowed. It only represented one emotion, and that was anger. He stared at the hands of the young man and woman holding each other. His mind was occupied by anger and drunkenness. He did not notice that Zhong Huiyan was secretly looking at him at this time. Her eyes were shining with a light that revealed the truth. Thump, thump, thump. His hard-soled leather boots collided with the hotel's smooth floor, making crisp and hard sounds. He walked forward with a sullen face. He was too lazy to speak. He directly grabbed Zhong Huiyan's left hand and pulled her back to his side. A gust of wind blew. Because the boy treasured his little female companion, he was ecstatic that she let him hold her hand. He was so nervous that he only dared to gently hold 3 of her fingers, so he did not react at all. When he realized that the beautiful girl had been pulled away, he felt that his hand was empty, just like his heart was empty. He raised his head in shock and looked at the boorish man in front of him who reeked of alcohol. His chest rose and fell angrily, but in order to maintain his composure, he forcibly suppressed his temper and asked coldly, "Uncle, what do you want to do?" The boy was called Lin Shihua. He was Lin Banshan's only son. Because he had such a father, He had been cherished and protected by countless elders since he was young, whether it was on Pop Star or when he occasionally returned to the Federation's Lin family mansion to visit relatives. He was surrounded and protected by countless people of the same age. In a place like Bermuda, Lin Shihua was a privileged person like the Crown Prince. He enjoyed all kinds of wealth and enjoyed all kinds of luxuries, including those women who had golden flowers in their eyes. He did not have any friends of the same age as him, and he disdained to look for so-called friends. He even scoffed at things like love. Until this morning, when he saw the girl in a white dress by the floor-to-ceiling window in his hotel lobby. He looked at the lonely expression on the girl's pure face, and just like that he fell for her. Every father downstairs saw a nervous little boy who was preparing to send his daughter to school for the first time. Every brother saw a stinky boy who climbed into the cinema for the first time. These were definitely bad memories that men did not want to remember the most. For similar reasons, when Su Lu saw Zhong Huiyan's little hand being held by the boy in the hotel lobby, his mood was very bad. When he heard the boy call him an uncle, his bad mood became even worse. Su Lu raised his empty left hand and slapped the boy's head heavily without any trace of politeness. He lectured, "How old are you? How dare you learn how to stir up trouble everywhere?" Lin Shihua was stunned. He had lived for 16 years and had never been hit before. Only after half a day did the dull pain on his head remind him that he had really been hit. "You're crazy. How dare you hit me?" Lin Shihua did not shout like the other rich kids. "Do you know who my father is?" On one hand, it was because his father had sternly reprimanded him for making such a stupid declaration that had no technical or aesthetic value. On the other hand, it was because he always thought that the people who were qualified to enter this hotel definitely knew who he was. Slap. Su Lu did not hold back and slapped the boy's head heavily again. He said, "There aren't many people in this world that I don't dare to hit." Lin Shihua rubbed his throbbing head. He was so shocked that he almost forgot how to make an angry expression. Then, he noticed that Zhong Huiyan's little white hand was still being held tightly by the drunkard. He gritted his teeth and said coldly, "Later, you better beg for a quick death." When he said this, Lin Shihua looked at Su Lu as if he was looking at a corpse in a pile of dog feces. It was abnormally cold. Standing beside Su Lu, Zhong Huiyan kept her head down in silence. Her drooping black hair hid a sweet smile. To her, holding hands with her brother was a very normal thing. The key was that he had pulled her to his side so abruptly. Standing in a position that seemed to belong to her forever, it felt really good. Because she was immersed in joy, she did not notice the beginning of the conversation. Then, she was awakened by Lin Shifeng's words. She suddenly raised her head and stared at the boy opposite her with a frown. She said coldly, "This is my brother. Who do you want to die?" Lin Shihua was stunned. He looked at the girl opposite him. Her furrowed brows were so beautiful. Although she was angry, she was still so moving. Then, he suddenly remembered what she had said. This drunkard was her brother? When one was infatuated with a pearl, one had to be extra protective of the gift box that contained the pearl. After a short while, Lin Shihua decided to let the drunkard go. However, the proud boy who had never been hit in his life still could not get rid of the anger in his heart. He frowned and looked at Su Lu. "Uncle, no, big brother, although you are Guagua's brother, I don't think you can so rudely oppose me dating her. You have to know that we are no longer children. I'll say something you might not like to hear, but we are in the rebellious phase of youth. Can you solve this by suppressing us?" Besides, at this time, Clockwork had already lowered his head and pretended to be shy. He clutched the corner of Su Li's clothes tightly. He did not look, but he could guess that the boy's gaze was getting more and more angry and provocative. Su Lu saw the mocking provocation in the boy's eyes as he calmly narrated the story. He also felt a strong sense of possessiveness. He narrowed his eyes and raised his hand again. "Pa pa pa pa." He hit the boy's head 4 times and frowned. "I killed people when I was 10 and fled when I was 16. I was wanted by the entire universe for my entire adolescence. You want to compete with me in terms of rebelliousness? Have you grown all your hair?" Li Feirong had been talking to Li Wei. By the time she noticed the conflict, it was already too late. She watched as Lin Shihua's head was being hit like a sandbag by that man. Her face instantly turned pale. She hurriedly pulled Lin Shihua into her arms and gently rubbed the back of his head. She looked at the boy's eyes that were tearing up from the pain. Her expression was calm, but her heart was filled with anger. This was a child that even Lin Banshan could not bear to hit. She did not even dare to hit him. She did not raise her head, nor did she bother to do so. She secretly made a decision. Even if this drunkard was Li Wei's friend, he had to pay the price. She said in a low voice, "Mister, there are some things that should not be done even if you are drunk. Seeing that you are the elder brother of that young lady, I advise you to know how to respect the matters of young people. If an adult wants to forcefully interfere, his elders will also interfere. There is no respect in this world for no reason. If my son were to chase after Lin Banshan's daughter, I would definitely respect him." Li Feirong raised her head in shock and anger. She wondered who this person was. After knowing that this child was Lin Banshan's son, he still dared to be so arrogant. Su Lu looked at the familiar face. He had already guessed the identity of the boy, but his face remained expressionless. He said, "This little fart, which elder wants to interfere in this matter? So what if it's Lin Banshan? Although the tiger in the West Woods is no longer around, there are still many elders around my family." Li Feirong looked at the pair of small eyes that left a deep impression on her. She then looked at the black-haired girl beside him and guessed that she was the little princess of the Zhong family. She covered her mouth in shock. Su Lu turned his head to look at Lin Shihua, who was holding his head. He said, "What is a real rebel? Learn from your father. Throw away all your family background and still dare to go around seducing young ladies. That is a real rebel." Lin Shihua did not understand these words. He only felt anger, pain, and grievance. He grabbed Li Feirong's hand and shouted, "Auntie, no one has ever dared to hit me. I already said that there is no one in this world that I dare not hit." Su Lu unceremoniously slapped him again. He frowned and said, "This is really strange. I admire Lin Banshan so much. A few years ago, I helped him discipline his brother, and now I have to help him discipline his son." Li Feirong quickly pulled Lin Shihua behind her, but she did not dare to show any signs of anger. One had to know that the image of Su Lu pointing a gun at Lin Daohai in the manner had left a deep impression on her. That conflict was because Lin Daohai had tried to assassinate Su Lu in the Westwoods. After that, when everyone thought that this matter would be forgotten, Su Lu ended his dinner with Jian Shui'er and Tai Ziyuan and led Group 7 to surround the manor. Even when Lin Banshan called to plead for mercy, it was useless. That was until the heads of the 7 families lowered their noble heads to show that they had lost. It was this incident that made Li Feirong realize that this small-eyed man did not have the concept of family background or power. The problem was that Su Lu and Group 7 were in the right during that incident, but today's situation was completely unreasonable. Li Feirong could not help but add another evaluation of Su Lu, who had been missing for 3 years. Unreasonable. Looking at Lin Shihua, who was in the arms of a mature woman, Su Lu shook his head. Like a strict father, he unreasonably shouted to Zhong Huan, who was beside him, "Go back to the room." In front of everyone except Philip, Zhong Huan had always given Su Lu face. Hearing this thunderous roar, she obediently held his hand and left. Returning to the luxurious suite on the top floor, there was no one else. Zhong Huan did not need to give Su Lu any face. She stood in front of the sofa, her hands on her slender waist. She lowered her head and looked at him with interest. Her beautiful black hair hung in front of her slightly raised chest, and her eyes were full of youthfulness. Su Lu, who had drunk too much wine, was thirsty and confused. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the delicate little face in front of him. He vaguely felt that something big was about to happen. "Brother!" Zhong Huan held her face and stared at his face. She shouted loudly, "When we were in the Empire, you said that I would one day fall in love with another boy. Then why did you hit him just now? Why do you care if I fall in love?" Su Lu was at a loss for words. In order to hide his awkwardness, he poured a glass of water from the table and drank it very slowly. Then, he found that the girl was still in that questioning position with her head lowered, so he very obediently moved back under her gaze. It's like this. After thinking for a while, he tried to explain, of course you have to fall in love, but you have to find a suitable partner. That little brat is called Lin Shihua, right? Don't be fooled by his appearance. If you think about it with your brain, you will know that a man who grew up in this kind of environment has nothing in his mind other than synthetic meat. Although his father is an amazing person, he will at most become a gang leader in the future. As your legal guardian, I will not allow this to happen. It was rare for him to have such a long speech, but Zhong Huiyan's cool words retorted, your best friend is just a gang leader. Su Lu reached out and pushed the girl's hair away from her face. He looked at the delicate little face full of anger and said with difficulty, you are still too young. Even if you want to fall in love, you have to wait until you are 16 years old. No, you have to wait until you are 18 years old before you are allowed to fall in love. Of course, the other party has to be approved by me. Zhong Huiyan stood up straight and looked at him with a cold smile. She said, brother, you don't want me to fall in love. You just want to tie me to your side. Su Lu angrily said, what nonsense are you talking about? Zhong Huiyan pointed at him with her fingertips. Your behavior just now shows that you are jealous. You are really crazy. Su Lu laughed. The coolness on Zhong Huiyan's face had long disappeared without a trace. She sweetly said, you are jealous. When you see other boys holding my hand, you are unhappy. Su Lu looked at the sweet smile on the girl's face. His eyebrows slowly creased. He spread out his hands and said, if your father was alive, he would not be happy just now either. Zhong Huiyan did not pay attention to his explanation. She giggled and like a little bird flying back to its nest, she comfortably snuggled in his arms and sweetly said, brother, just admit that you like me. We are not really related by blood, so there is no shame. Smelling the faint fragrance floating to his nose and feeling the youthful body in his arms, Su Lu gently hugged her just like when they were children. He suddenly found that the nutrition ratio that Philip had made in the past few years was really good. The little girl in his arms had developed well after entering puberty. She was tender, soft, and warm. Su Lu suddenly woke up and found that there was something wrong with his previous absent-mindedness. He frowned and put her on the sofa. He said, you are a big girl, but you don't feel ashamed. Yes, I am not afraid of being ashamed. What are you afraid of? Zhong Huiyan angrily put her head behind his shoulder and looked at him. She said, that year, you held my hand in the rain at the airport. You held my hand in the mountains. You also held me on the spaceship. You also held me in the amusement park. I know that I was a little girl at that time, so you could hold my hand. And now? I am growing up day by day. You rarely hold my hand, let alone hold me. I don't like it. I would rather not have grown up. Zhong Huiyan's eyes were slightly red. She looked at him and said calmly, but people always have to grow up. I'm not afraid of being ashamed. I just like to hold you. Su Lu helplessly spread out his hands. He wanted to say something, but he didn't know what to say. He could only sigh softly. I like you. Zhong Huiyan said with certainty and firmness, I also know that you like me. Whether it is because you are afraid of being gossiped about, or because you are suppressed by the pedantic and even stupid views of love and marriage in your mind that you don't dare to admit it. Don't try to refuse me, because you are the only one in the world who has seen my naked body. Do you remember how many times you have bathed me since I was a child? How many times have you brazenly seen my body while I was bathing? Zhong Huiyan bravely stared into Su Li's eyes. Her smooth and white cheeks revealed two blushes of shyness, like fresh apples on the branches. Brother, you have combed my hair and washed my underwear. Even when I had my first period, you were by my side. Until today, I still remember how warm your hand was when you put it on my lower abdomen. My parents are dead. You are my only family in the world. But brother, you are not my biological brother, so you have to be responsible for me. You have to marry me. Su Lu, supported by the toughest stone spirit in the universe, reluctantly listened to the girl's shy and brave confession. He was stupefied for a long time. Suddenly, he understood the matter. He waved his arms and protested, you were only 5 years old when I bathed you. And Shangqiu was there that night. I said when I was young that I liked Shangqiu. I didn't mind her being my mistress. Zhong Huiyan smiled sweetly. Her bright eyes curved into two crescent moons. Then she slightly raised her chin and proudly and coldly asked, "You don't have to be responsible for things that happened when I was 5 years old? Or are you saying that you can ignore me now that I am 15 years old?" Su Lu rubbed her head and said with a bitter smile, "Good girl. Do you know how many sisters-in-law you already have? If I don't die when I go back this time, there will be more trouble. You can just let me go, okay? It is because I am going back to the Federation soon and I need to see those women that I am anxious. I am going back to the West Woods. Who will look after you?" Zhong Huiyan angrily escaped from his evil hands. She raised her white sleeve to wipe the tears on her cheeks and shouted, "It will be best if you go back to the Federation and find that they are all married." Then, Su Lu wanted to say that it would be best, but when he was about to say it, he subconsciously sighed. "That's not very good, is it?" Zhong Huiyan suddenly raised her head and looked at him very seriously. After a moment of silence, she said, "Brother, it is really dangerous to go back to the Federation this time. You may really die. Before you die, can you promise me one last wish?" Su Lu said resolutely. Zhong Huiyan angrily picked up a pillow to cover her burning face and protested in a muffled voice, "It took me a lot of courage to say this. You don't know that my last wish is to be your woman. Why did you say no?" Su Lu looked at the eyes blinking behind the pillow and felt that this was the cute little girl. He said with a smile, "Because I will never die." Zhong Huiyan threw away the pillow and said mockingly, "You only know how to copy your teacher's famous words. Brother, when you were young you lived in the East Woods called the Clock Tower Street, right?" "Yes." "Do you know why the Clock Tower Street is called that? Because when human society was exploring, the main battleship of the 4th Military Region that was carrying out a mission inexplicably crashed, leaving only an antique clock." Zhong Huiyan cutely tapped the tip of her nose and said, "The commander of the 4th Military Region is my ancestor. What a coincidence, right?" Hearing this, Su Lu realized that the story of the origin of the name of the Clock Tower Street was actually related to the Zhong family of the West Woods. "I also know that when my ancestor saw the explosion when the battleship crashed, he once said something. Later, it became a famous quote that you Eastwoods people use to pretend to be cool." Su Lu repeated with a smile, "My mood is lonelier than Huiyan." Zhong Huiyan moved her body and lay on his chest. From a very close distance, she looked at his face and said, "My name is Zhong Huiyan." Su Lu felt the heartbeat of the girl in his arms and asked, "And then?" "The East Woods and the West Woods are separated by countless galaxies, facing each other on opposite sides of the universe. They are so far away that they can't be further away. But the amazing thing is that the places we live and the stories we tell seem to be connected. This connection is very strong. It is so strong that the first person I met on the ancient clock tower when I was young could only be you. A big fugitive meeting a small fugitive. This is the arrangement of fate. Brother, this kind of thing is something you can't avoid." Zhong Huiyan leaned on his strong chest and said slowly with her eyes closed. Because she was too tired, she fell into a deep sleep with tears on her face. Su Lu silently looked at the girl in his arms and thought of the girl in white who held a doll under the stars many years ago. He couldn't help but feel a little lost. So, 10 years had passed in the blink of an eye. The temperature of the suite was set low. Zhong Huiyan's hand felt a little cold. In her sleep, she subconsciously put her hand into Su Li's collar and pressed it against his warm and strong chest. Then, like a playful cat, she gently scratched it. Probably because the feeling and temperature were good, the girl's lips curled up and showed a satisfied and sweet smile. Su Lu looked at the smile on her face and couldn't help but smile slightly. He whispered, "When you were 10 years old, I thought that in the future, there would be a lot of annoying little boys with pimples on their faces chasing you." He pulled out his numb arm and gently moved his fingers. With a thought, he slowly drew on Zhong Huiyan's thin eyebrows with his fingertips. After a long silence, he calmly said, "If you were still awake, you might be happy to hear this sentence. At that time, I was very unhappy when I imagined that scene. But I have to admit that it is indeed different from when I saw that scene before. Because he drank too much and listened to too many confessions from girls that he didn't know how to respond, Su Li's head was a little dizzy. He took a pillow and put it behind his neck. After looking at the ceiling for more than 10 seconds, he fell asleep quietly. The next morning, the light blue star light penetrated the bulletproof glass and occupied every corner of the room. The siblings on the sofa slowly fell down. They woke up almost at the same time. Zhong Huiyan found that her left hand was comfortably stroking in Su Li's arms. She shyly pulled it out and then rushed into the bathroom with a bashful smile while rubbing her messy hair. Su Lu stood up and stretched his arms to get rid of the soreness of last night. Then he glanced at the closed door of the bathroom and thought with a smile that the little girl's expression would make her rush out of the door in a while. He held his waist and shyly told himself to forget all the words she had said yesterday and not to think about them again. He sighed with emotion and thought that the words he heard last night were beautiful notes in life that could only be listened to quietly but not grasped. Half an hour later, Zhong Huiyan finished washing up and then walked out of the bathroom. Without any hesitation, she went directly to Su Lu. The light beige windbreaker decorated the girl's waistline very charming. She had very light makeup on her face, which was rare, and her eyebrows and eyes were particularly beautiful. She held her hands nervously and looked at Su Lu very seriously and said, "To me, what I said yesterday is probably just an episode in my life. But please remember that this will definitely be the main melody of my life." Looking at the closed door and thinking about the girl's declaration before she left, Su Lu, who was in the light blue light, was extremely stiff. He still maintained his comical posture with his arms raised. At this moment, he even felt that he had forgotten what the movements Uncle Feng Yu had taught him were. Just as he turned into a stone statue, the metal piece in his ear that had stopped vibrating for a long time came again. It became a clear sound that transmitted into his brain through his eardrums. But today, the sound was very emotional. Chapter 942. On a broken black spaceship far outside the atmosphere of Pop Star, Philip, who was alone, shouted to a stone statue in a luxurious suite on the top floor of a hotel on the ground through long-distance communication. "Although I no longer have the ability to peek at everything that happens in this world, at least I can hear it. I have to say that the story last night was really wonderful. This story was so wonderful that I had to break the tacit understanding between you and me. I came to express my admiration and congratulations." Philip's thin and clear voice suddenly became extremely serious. "But no matter how touching the girl's confession is, you must control yourself. You can't be a beast. She is only 15 years old." Su Li's silence clearly made Philip, who was not proficient in human emotions, make some kind of wrong judgment. She screamed in panic. "Su Lu, you can't really mess around. If you dare to mess around, when I return to the Federation, I will tell Jian Shui'er about what you did. Tell Shang Qiu, tell Nan Xiangmei, and tell your first love, Zhang Xiaoming. If you push me too far, I will sell you to Mr. Tian." The statue in the suite called Su Lu was finally revived by someone's scream. He covered his ears and roared, "Die! Can't you see that I am annoyed?" After a long time of sound similar to the background noise of the universe, Philip's resentful voice sounded again. "Why are you so fierce? Do you want me to play a romance movie episode for you? It's a real romance movie, not the kind you like to watch. How about it?" A few days later, Zhong Huiyan seemed to have returned to normal. When she was with Su Lu, she was well-behaved and calm. She never talked about the main theme of the movie again. After a long time of thinking, Su Lu felt that he did not have the ability to deal with this kind of thing. So, he decided to pretend that he did not hear the confession that night. If he could return to the Federation alive and set foot on a better tomorrow, there would naturally be those women to help him solve the problem. As for the problems that might be caused by those women, let's just pretend that those problems don't exist, he thought as he put on his hat and sunglasses and wandered around Bermuda with Li Wei. Bermuda, which had just experienced a tragic war, regained its peace at a shocking speed. The atmosphere of singing and dancing quickly occupied all the streets and alleys. Su Lu, who was wandering between the streets of the casino, looked at the world that was completely different from a few days ago. He couldn't help but sigh with emotion, wondering how the self-healing ability of human society could be so strong. Xiong Linquan and the members of Team 7 were also very puzzled. They had been warmly received by the Bermuda authorities, and although they were enjoying a rare moment of happiness and debauchery, they still couldn't understand why Su Lu wanted them to stay in Bermuda for so long instead of directly returning to the Federation at such a tense time. Because I need to make some preparations. On the tarmac of the spaceport, Su Lu explained to his team members. Hearing Philip's order to get ready, he stepped forward and hugged Li Wei. Then he boarded the spaceship and held Zhong Huiyan's small hand in his right hand. A black spaceship that seemed to be composed of countless garbage cans slowly and silently landed on a remote mineral planet in Bermuda. The dust on the low-gravity planet was blown everywhere, covering the huge channel-like dock with a thin layer of dust that was quickly cleaned by an automatic cleaning device. The hatch at the bottom of the black spaceship opened, and the team members wearing full space infantry suits followed Su Lu out. They curiously looked at everything around them through their helmets. The equipment is perfect, and the power system is very advanced. Gu Shifeng looked at the repair arm in front of them and praised. He had already guessed that this was the boss' secret base, but he couldn't understand why such a large base would appear here. This place has nothing to do with the Empire, and there are no remnants of the previous civilization. After entering the dock's control room, the 5 people removed their heavy vacuum helmets. Su Lu gave a simple explanation and didn't go into any more details. However, for Xiong Linquan and Gu Shifeng, since Su Lu said that this base had nothing to do with the Empire, it was enough. The origin of this base was actually an extremely interesting story. 3 years ago, an armed smuggler in Bermuda was robbed by a tri-winged spaceship. Just as he was in despair, Li Jiedu successfully forced the charter computer to reboot at the Federation Bureau of Proclamation. The tri-winged spaceship instantly became an ice-cold metal body that no one could control. The greedy armed merchant knew how advanced the tri-winged spaceship was and wouldn't let go of this opportunity. Thus, he dragged the tri-winged spaceship back to his secret dock and prepared to cut it up for research. The dock couldn't do anything to the tri-winged spaceship. Then one day the old man, or Philip, woke up in the tri-winged spaceship. Under the shocked gazes of the Bermudians, he flew to the Federation covered in dust and began to rescue Private Su Lu. At the end of the story, Philip rescued Su Lu from the Federation. Before the 3 of them left to wander the universe, the tri-winged spaceship quietly returned to the dock. From then on, the dock became Philip's secret base, and the armed merchant and his subordinates were easily subdued. The tri-winged spaceship was divided into 7 small high-speed spaceships, and Philip left 9 computing programs to manage the dock and the spaceships on his behalf. The 7 spaceships began to sweep the many smuggling routes. After all, Philip had been doing this kind of business for many years and was already very familiar with it. Through long-distance communication, Su Lu and the other 2 could control the 7 spaceships and send clear orders to the Bermudians in the base. With the continuous influx of resources, the old dock began to expand at a terrifying speed, and a simple military factory began to be built in the northern hemisphere of the abandoned mineral planet. The TP-modified sniper rifle was designed by Philip and Su Lu together, and then produced by this simple military factory. In order to avoid attracting the attention of the charter, they deliberately chose the Bermudian arms magnate Ji Hua to deliver it to the West Woods. Although the Bermudian armed merchant had never been able to access the core secrets of the base, he had made a lot of money from it, which was undoubtedly a blessing in disguise. Before the tri-winged spaceship landed at the base today, they had already informed the Bermudians to evacuate, so Xiong Linquan and the others saw that the base was empty. The roar of the metal structure rang out, and the team members stood by the window and watched the continuous flow of goods from the tri-winged spaceship into the base through the self-propelled cargo path. They watched as hundreds of boxes of purified crystal ore were sent into the spaceship, and their faces were extremely shocked. Mountain Pao asked in surprise, "Boss, have you been a smuggler for the past 3 years?" Su Lu, who was checking the details of the electronic records on the workbench, nodded and replied in a low voice, Although I never care about these things, it can be said that I have stolen a lot of things in the past 3 years and sold most of them. By the way, there is a batch of Liban's special grade silk in the inventory that I stole last year. If you want to give it to your girlfriend, then take a few tons with you later. A few tons of silk? Xiong Linquan rubbed his aching forehead, thinking to himself, so this is the reason why you don't want to be a hero in the Federation or an emperor in the Empire. Chapter 943. After loading and unloading the smuggled ores, the base that had been converted from an old shipyard did not quiet down. A loud rumble came from the sparse air, and everyone could feel it through the floor-to-ceiling observation windows. Xiong Linquan and the others looked out the window and saw a pile of metal components slowly rising from the horizon of the light yellow mineral planet. These metal components did not have a regular shape, and under the black armor, traces of corrosion could be faintly seen. They looked like trash. Even if they were scrap metal, such a large amount of trash suddenly pouring into the base still gave them a fright. The 5 of them looked at each other and very naturally connected this pile of trash to the giant spaceship in front of the shipyard. This was because the spaceship was indeed no different from scrap metal. Just as they had guessed, the giant lifting and maintenance equipment in the shipyard began to move. Dozens of thick mechanical arms extended from both sides of the shipyard, grabbing the metal components on the edge and slowly lifting them to the outside of the spaceship. Thousands of fireworks-like welding flames lit up the surroundings of the shipyard. The black, tattered spaceship was like a piece of clothing that had been worn for countless years. Countless heavy metal components were sewn onto its body with hard, heavy graphite or cores and welding patterns. As time passed, more and more black metal components were hanging on the outside of the tattered spaceship. The heavy components were piled up like bottles and jars, dense and ugly. The spaceship suddenly looked like a tired old man in a Bermuda garbage dump. Xiong Linquan and the others looked at the scene outside the window. They watched as the metal components the size of apartment buildings were randomly pieced together and welded onto the spaceship. They watched as the former Bureau of Proclamation tri-winged spaceship that they had been on for many days became bigger and uglier in this old shipyard. They could not help but be dumbfounded. What's the use of hanging so many trash components on the spaceship? Xiong Linquan recalled the scene of the black, tattered spaceship wreaking havoc in S1 3 years ago. He scratched his head and asked, is the boss really going to use this spaceship to crash into the official residence? The spaceship installation work in the shipyard was simple and boring. Although the scene was shocking, it was unavoidable to get tired of it after seeing it so many times. The team members silently carried on with the work at hand, no longer looking out the window from time to time. Gu Shifeng used her electronic notebook to record the numerical curves on the workbench. After confirming that there were no problems with the power supply of the shipyard, she ended the mission for this period. She sat back in her chair, somewhat tired, and gently placed her feet on the workbench. Gu Shifeng lit a cigarette and took a sip of coffee. She squinted her eyes and looked out of the window. There was no entertainment in the old shipyard. After the patrol ended, Xiong Linquan brought Mountain Pao and the others back to the control room. He took Gu Shifeng's coffee and took a sip, then took out a pack of cigarettes and gave them to his team members. Xiong Linquan held the cigarette in his mouth and quickly disassembled the TP sniper rifle in his hand. His eyes were a little blurred by the smoke. He twisted open the pulse ignition valve and took out the carbon composite tube. Xiong Linquan held it between 2 fingers and observed it under the light for a moment. He squinted his eyes and said, the sniper rifle designed by the boss is indeed fierce, but we don't have enough people. We can't gather enough firepower. It's not bad for assassination when we get back to the Federation, but it won't make much of a difference if we have to face the special forces of Small Eyes head-on. Flicking away the remaining cigarette in his hand, Xiong Linquan frowned as he looked out the window at the busy installation scene in the shipyard. He couldn't help but say gloomily, so many resources and energy are all used to put on a jacket for the 3 wingers. Even if this isn't a jacket but a real bulletproof vest, it still won't be enough to fight the Federal fleet. I don't know what the boss is thinking. It would be even better if there were a few MXs. The boss said that this shipyard has nothing to do with the Empire, which means that this is all the result of his work alone. Gu Shifeng shook her head and said, any weapon or equipment, even if it looks simple to you, is a very troublesome system project. Without the support of the entire system's cutting-edge technology and a large industrial base, it's already incredible that he can make a TP, let alone something like a military mech. Other than the Federation and the Empire, who has this ability? Don't the people of Bermuda want it? The black spaceship in the old shipyard outside the window had become bigger and uglier at a visible speed in the past few days. In fact, it seemed to be growing a little bit with every passing minute. The size of the spaceship had become extremely terrifying. Just from its appearance alone, it seemed like it could fit several Parliament hills. Xiong Linquan looked out the window at the giant spaceship that took up most of the sky. Feeling the insignificance of the human body, he couldn't help but frown and say, are we really going to charge into the capital ring like this? The problem is that the bigger the spaceship, the easier it is to be discovered by the glory of the charter, and the easier it is to be hit by the battleship's main cannon. At this moment, Su Lu pushed open the door and walked in. He had been busy with modifying the spaceship with Philip on the upper level of the shipyard for the past 2 days, so he didn't hear the discussion of his team members, nor did he know of Xiong Lin's worries. Walking to the window, Su Lu supported his waist and moved his sore body. Looking at the shadow of the giant spaceship that was gradually taking shape, or rather, gradually taking shape, a satisfied smile appeared on his face. He turned to the others and said, this ship has been following this for a very long time. But now, it no longer looks like a 3-winged ship, so I want to give it a new name. I haven't thought of one yet. Do any of you have any objections? Gu Shifeng shrugged and said, boss, you know that whether it's naming people or battleships, it's always the most difficult thing. Pearl said, we'll go back to the Federation with boss. How about we call it Group 7? Monkey shook his head and said mockingly, how can a battleship be called Group 7 if the team is called Group 7? In the future, when both sides are firing at each other, if you say you're Group 7 Pearl, people will think you're a battleship communicator. Then what do you think is domineering? Monkey waved his arms and said proudly, Universe 7. Xiong Linquan did not join in the discussion. He walked silently to Su Li's side and expressed his concern with a serious expression. The ship's body is too big. It's easy for the charter to discover it and be hit. Su Lu calmly explained, to the glory of the charter, no matter how small the spaceship is, it will still be discovered. But to us, the bigger the ship, the smaller it will become in the future. What kind of bullshit logic was that? Xiong Linquan stared blankly at Su Li's face and could not help but sigh. Boss, you've really become a third-rate philosopher. There was a gentle breeze on the abandoned mineral planet. It was not rustling, but still solemn and stirring. The giant shadow that enveloped the entire old dock gradually became smaller. Accompanied by thousands of tons of dust, the giant black broken spaceship, or rather, Universe 7, slowly and resolutely left the ground and flew into the pitch-black universe. In the deepest control cabin of the spaceship, the alarm signal sounded. Everyone undid the flowing restraints on their bodies and began to adapt to the feeling of false gravity. Because of the existence of Philip, the team members had never entered the control cabin. At this time, only Su Lu and Zhong Huiyan were there. This time, going deep into Bermuda, I feel more and more that it relies too much on the Federation and has no power to protect itself. If the Gary Corridor warp hole can protect Bermuda from being annexed by the Empire, why hasn't the Federation eaten up Bermuda, this mineral-rich star field, for thousands of years? A slender mechanical arm swayed slightly in front of him, as if a professor was shaking his head to express his mockery. A delicate voice sounded in the cabin. The Federation's charter stipulates that Bermuda is absolutely independent. Even if the Federation wants to go around the charter and annex Bermuda, they still need to ask the charter computer for permission. In other words, when the human civilization began to rebuild in this star field, the one who protected Bermuda was never the Bermudians, but the charter. It used to be me, but now it's that piece of scrap metal under the Bureau of Proclamation. Su Lu asked, if the civilization of this star field is inherited from the Group of 5 and the biomarker library in the battleship, why did the Group of 5 look at Bermuda differently? using the reference chip to supervise human society to prevent human society from going down the path of destruction like the ancestral civilization. This is the true spirit of the charter. Philip calmly explained, when the group of 5 was rebuilding human civilization in the upper forest TriStar system, they chose the charter computer, which is me, to carry out this kind of supervision work. They required that an identity chip be implanted behind the neck of every person. But this practice is without precedent and experience. It can even be said that they are conducting a new experiment on human society. Although some of the 5 guys on the spaceship are lustful, some like to drink, some like to eat fish, and some like to eat meat, the one thing they have in common is that they are all shut-ins. The shut-ins always like to be cautious when doing things, so they decided to set aside a star field for the so-called free people. This is the origin of Bermuda. So that's how it is. Sulu sighed. The more I know about the secrets of humanity's pioneering period, the more I feel that the group of statues in the Charter Square is really amazing. Without those 5 people, how could humanity survive in the upper forest TriStar system? Philip ridiculed. If those 5 guys were still alive, they would be very happy to hear your evaluation. They always thought that shut-ins can save the world. Back then, the group of 5's experimental design of the blueprint of humanity's new civilization was very shocking to Sulu, but Zhong Huoyan, who had been quietly listening to the story, was only concerned about another thing. Su Fei, what is a shut-in? First, please don't call me Su Fei, you can call me Xiao Fei. Second, shut-in is a very cultural term with deep meanings, it's very difficult to explain. This kind of contemptuous and sarcastic conversation had happened countless times on this broken spaceship in the past 3 years. Zhong Huoyan and Philip seemed to always be able to find a new topic to attack each other. And every time that happened, Sulu, who was dizzy from the noise, always felt that he had raised a pair of stubborn twins, which made him very uncomfortable. He waved his hand to stop another debate, looked at the probe on the top of the mechanical arm with a serious expression and asked, "The earthquake under the BG plateau of Mo Hua planet, what is the result of your calculation?" Philip was silent for a long time and then replied, "I lack enough calculation nodes, and I don't have a complete database for comparison. But according to the data collected, especially the air particle data collected above the BG plateau, I can only say that the result of the vague speculation is very bad." "What result?" "The specific situation is unknown." Philip directly replied, "What I can tell you is that there may have been a bad bomb under the BG plateau." Su Li's eyes narrowed, and after a long silence he asked, "Is it the kind of bad bomb you told me before that destroyed the ancestral planet?" "It's not that powerful, so it's not a big bad guy, but a little bad guy," Philip replied. "But a little bad guy is also very troublesome. After returning to the Federation, you do your thing, and I do mine, so I have to stop it." After a short pause, Philip said seriously, "What I don't understand the most is why the piece of scrap metal under the Bureau of Proclamation was not found." Zhong Huoyan opened her eyes wide and said, "Maybe it's because you're not here, and the charter computer is not as good as before? Although it's a lot of roundabout, I still want to thank you for your rare praise." Philip's voice was emotionless. "But don't forget, I've been observing that piece of scrap metal for the past 3 years through various methods, and I can confirm that not only has it not become stupid, it's even more difficult to deal with than before." Outside the window was the dark universe. A long space voyage was not always a beautiful journey under the gaze of the stars. Sulu looked out of the window in silence. Looking at the Federation in front of him that could not be seen at all, he suddenly asked, "How confident are you?" The control cabin suddenly became extremely quiet. Su Li's question directly involved the war after returning to the Federation, and whether there was even a sliver of a chance. After a long time, Philip's slender and calm voice broke the silence. "The central database under the Bureau of Proclamation has 3 more layers of filters, and it's very difficult for me to hack into the core program, but with that person's help, I can easily read the thoughts of that piece of scrap metal. Although the confidence is not high, it's still there. It doesn't matter how much as long as it's there, we have to try." After 11. 3 Federation Universe Standards, The broken black spaceship passed through the invisible border, left the Bermuda star system, and officially entered the Federation star system. This space was extremely far away from the Federation forward base, and there was no way to see the alloy fortress the size of an asteroid. There was only a series of pearl-like charter information checkpoints, and they were quietly arranged in front of it. For some reason, the broken black spaceship did not choose to avoid these charter checkpoints, nor did it choose to hide its existence and carefully sneak through the gaps in the glory of the charter. Instead, it simply charged through. The huge spaceship blocked the light of the nearest star of the Hunter Rabbit star system behind it, casting a terrifying shadow on those charter checkpoints. At the checkpoints, the officers under the Bureau of Proclamation were scanning the passage and watching the passengers returning from Bermuda when they suddenly noticed the shadow. They turned their heads to look out the window, and then they saw a scene that they would never forget for the rest of their lives. A mountain-like pile of black metal trash flew over with an overwhelming shadow, silently and solemnly flying over their heads toward the Capitol ring. Chapter 944. On the outskirts of the Capitol Special District, at the center of the dense network of lines that looked like the roots of a 10,000-year-old giant tree, in the center of the Federation's charter computer. The two-dimensional light curtain hanging in the magnificent underground space like a flag did not move in the wind, nor did it crack in the earthquake. It was calm and indifferent, as if it would not change from the beginning of the universe until its destruction. For some reason, the green data waterfall that was flowing smoothly had a very brief moment of stagnation. 3,333 seconds later, in the box-like square building on the ground in the distance, a sharp siren rang out. The siren was mixed with a clear mechanical and electronic synthesized sound, indicating that this was the first sequence of events. The director of the Bureau of Proclamation, Chui Judong, looked at his subordinates who were anxiously walking through the work hall like ants. With a pale face, he reprimanded in a deep voice, "From now on, all external communications are prohibited. Strengthen the monitoring of all key departments. Speed up the data collection and then bypass the procedures and directly report to the higher-ups." This is the first sequence of events, equivalent to the invasion of the Empire. The president's official residence was shrouded in wind and snow. The lawn in front of the terrace had long been covered by snow. There was no color to be found, no matter whether it was green or yellow. Time had entered the first month of the 76th year of the constitutional calendar. The Federation government was under great pressure. It could even be described as being swayed by the wind and rain. But it was the first time that the staff in the official residence saw the expression on Director Breen's face so stiff. It was also very rare to hear the voice of the president sternly reprimanding the officials in the Oval Office. Waving his hand to signal his most loyal subordinate to leave the office, President Pabre rubbed his somewhat numb cheeks hard. Compared to when he was just elected president, he had lost a lot of weight. For the first time, traces of aging appeared on his tanned face. He looked at the blurry picture on the table, looked at the huge broken spaceship that looked like a garbage mountain, and his eyebrows twitched slightly. He remembered the picture of the terrifyingly fast spaceship crossing the surface of planet S1 3 years ago. Then he remembered the scene 4 years ago when the small-eyed man returned from the Empire. Hundreds of millions of people at home and on the streets excitedly watched the live broadcast. That time, the Federation warmly welcomed the return of the hero. What about this time? Yes, Mr. President. According to your instructions, the 4th Fleet has left the base and is heading to the star region 56 LYI determined by the charter computer to intercept. I assure you that the main cannons of the Twin Moons base have been activated and are on standby. Regardless of whether that 3-winged battleship is as fast as before, the Army is confident that we can destroy it. We will never let it enter the Capitol ring. In a heavily guarded building in the western suburbs of the capital, General Lee Jae-do, chairman of the Federation's Joint Chiefs of Staff and 1st Military Region, slowly hung up the phone. Then, through the top-secret command system, he issued one order after another calmly and clearly. There was no sign of nervousness on his face at all. Tapping on the standby button of the system, Lee Jae-do dragged a picture into the hologram desktop. He looked at the blurry picture of a huge black spaceship that was like the shadow of the abyss before the radiance of the Hunter Rabbit System star. The corner of his lips slowly revealed a mocking smile. What's the point of a pile of trash returning? Countless orders were sent from the Federation's capital to every corner of the universe. Somewhere in the dark space, the Fourth Fleet began to slowly adjust the posture of the ship. Then, it suddenly accelerated. Accompanied by the blue exhaust flames of the crystal engine, it silently flew toward the star region 56 LYI at high speed. The Fourth Fleet was personally organized by General Hong Yuliang, the Commander-in-Chief of the Federation Fleet. Because it was responsible for the vital mission of defending the capital ring, the fleet had sufficient energy and an astonishing number of main cannons. Almost at the same time, on the two sides of S1, which had been orbiting opposite each other for hundreds of millions of years and rarely appeared under the same sky at the same time, facing the deep universe, dozens of devices that looked like oil wells slowly rose to the surface. Heavy alloy valves slowly opened amidst the dust and smoke. The ground troops stationed on the various planets of the Federation raised their alert level at the same time. None of the troops knew what was going on. They just followed the orders of their superiors and began to prepare for battle. Countless MX military mechas with a metallic luster began to perform self-check procedures. The roar of the dual engines resounded throughout the military camp. On the hologram deep underground of the Bureau of Proclamation, the eye that had not opened for 3 years once again appeared in the dense and flowing waterfall of green data. It looked up without the slightest emotion as if saying, "You're back." Because of the return of the junk spaceship, the entire Federation began to prepare for battle. An inexplicable sense of nervousness appeared in many places. At this time, in the distant universe, the black junk spaceship was also having its final preparation meeting. This star region near Bermuda was still extremely far from Upper Forest, but it was extremely close to the West Woods. The Federation fleet could not possibly arrive so quickly, and other than the reorganized fleet, it was difficult for anything to threaten this junk spaceship. Therefore, the members in the cabin were not nervous. Su Li's gaze slowly swept across the faces of the men as he silently counted in his heart. Xiong Linquan, Gu Shifeng, Da Vinci, Mountain Pao, Pearl, Monkey, Dongfang Yu, and an NTR member of the 17th Division. That was everyone. Our purpose in returning to the Federation this time is to avenge our dead brothers and make President Pabre and the government pay the price. As Su Li's voice rang out in the cabin, the members who were laughing and smoking turned serious. Da Vinci took the military backpack next to his wheelchair and patted it. The metal identity tag in the backpack made a crisp sound, as if the souls of the dead members of Group 7 were replying, "We heard you. You want to bring down the Federation government with just these few people? You guys are still so naive. Your goals are always so grand and unrealistic." Dongfang Yu mocked from the corner. After escaping from the southwest of Mo Hua planet, everyone was used to this guy's occasional sarcasm. After all, they had gone through life and death together for such a long time, so no one could be bothered with him. You can't say that our goal in returning to the Federation is to not have any cavities. Su Lu spread his hands and said helplessly. Dongfang Yu stood up with the help of the cabin wall and said seriously, "As the battle planner and supreme commander, you should know that fewer people should die." After a moment of silence, Su Lu replied, "I understand what you mean. After all, I am a person of the Empire. I promise you that this time, I will strive to have the least number of people die. I will definitely not cause a civil war in the Federation." After doing the battle mobilization that was not needed anymore, Su Lu returned to the control cabin. Rubbing his tired face, he sat cross-legged and looked out of the window in a daze. Zhong Huiyan walked over and sat down quietly beside him. For some reason, there was a bright red flower in her hair today. Contrasting with her fair and delicate face, she looked particularly young and attractive. When the red flower entered his eyes, Su Lu suddenly remembered some scenes from the past. He smiled bitterly and said, "Where did the flowers come from?" "Su Fei made them. There are still a lot of them in the biological cultivation cabin below." Su Lu frowned and said, We will definitely need help when we return to the Federation, but I don't know if they can trust me, a person of the Empire. I am only good at fighting, but not good at planning. Actually, I am a little frustrated at this time. In the Federation, he had fought countless battles, but at that time, he had companions like Tai Ziyuan who were well-versed in the art of politics. Most importantly, he had a female military advisor who could be trusted in all aspects. In the Wangdu apartment, in the Linyuan, every time the red flower or the red dress came into view, many of the problems that troubled him became very simple. Perhaps it was because of this reason that when he saw the red flower in Zhong Huiyan's hair, he could not help but express his confusion. He did not expect the little watermelon to suddenly transform into cool Zhou. He just wanted to vent his troubles. The reason why you are frustrated at this time is actually very simple. Zhong Huiyan looked at him and smiled. Brother, you think too highly of yourself in Group 7, but in the end, you realize that this importance is fake. If you want to change the Federation, to be honest, all of you together are not as useful as me. Su Lu knew that this was the truth. The return of the little princess of the Zhong family in the West Woods must be very difficult for the Federation government to deal with. I can guess the plan that you haven't told me. Zhong Huiyan looked into his eyes and sighed. You must be going back to assassinate President Pabre and Li Jiedu. Su Lu touched the back of his head and admitted, this is indeed my plan. As expected, Zhong Huiyan opened her eyes wide and said with emotion, can you be a little more mature? This concerns billions of people in the Federation. Is your plan that simple? Su Lu said with a smile, Lao Bai said that my greatest strength is that I can simplify complicated things. Seeing that Zhong Huiyan's expression was a little ugly, he quickly spread his hands and asked seriously, well, if you were to handle it, what would be the arrangement? Zhong Huiyan took out a few pieces of coconut bread from her bag and placed them on the table. She said seriously, human society has never been a whole. If the Federation is simply divided, it can be roughly divided into 6 parts. The government, Parliament Hill, the Bureau of Proclamation, the 7 great families, the media, and the people. If you want a bad person to receive justice, you must first make him lose all power in his hands. In other words, the direct goal of returning to the Federation this time is to make President Pabre step down and change the entire government. To make the Federation president step down during his term of office, other than being assassinated by people like you, there is only one way, and that is to be impeached. Last year, the Federation Management Committee started the impeachment process against President Pabre, but it didn't pass. Mother once told me to never underestimate the influence that Madam has on the Federation. She even said that the Federation's Parliament Hill is actually the back of the mountain. If that's the case, then I'm sure that Lady Tai didn't do her best in last year's impeachment case. Her silence during this time doesn't mean that she is backing down, but that she feels that it's not the time to launch a thunderous strike. What kind of opportunity is Lady Tai waiting for? What is she afraid of? It's very simple. She is afraid of President Pabre's influence among the people. She has been silently waiting for the day when the people stay away from Pabre. The Silent March movement has become more and more influential, especially after the bloody incident in Nankashao. However, it still can't cause a devastating blow to the president's reputation. In the past 6 months, the heaviest blow to the Federation government was the special edition of the Capital Special District Daily. If the investigation of the antique bell could continue, and the newspaper could continue to reveal the truth, the reputation of the president and the government would be ruined. Unfortunately, the only 2 people who dared to report the news are now in custody. Another key point is the Patriot Act. If this act can be abolished, the Federation government will lose most of its secret power. Abolishing the Patriot Act requires an unconstitutional lawsuit. Coincidentally, the only unconstitutional lawsuit scheduled in the Supreme Court in the past 6 months is Bob. The people no longer support Pabre, and the government will lose the secret power needed to rule. This is the opportunity that Madam has been waiting for. Su Lu frowned and asked, it seems to be nonsense. What should we do? Zhong Huiyan said angrily, of course, We should rescue Bob and Wood and hand them over to Tai Zhuan so that they can start reporting and fighting the lawsuit again. That simple? Su Lu said, this plan doesn't seem complicated. It's called clear, not simple, Zhong Huiyan corrected him seriously. Su Lu frowned and said, if those two people can solve so many problems, why hasn't Lady Tai done anything yet? I don't know about that. Zhong Huiyan frowned and explained, but I believe that as long as you rescue those two people, you will definitely benefit a lot. The evidence of Macklin and the antique bell was given to them by you. Su Lu corrected her, it was that hooligan Mr. Shi. Zhong Huiyan's plan sounded very reasonable, but in Su Li's view, any battle was always full of countless unknowns. For example, he could not find a reasonable answer as to why Bob and Wood had not been rescued. However, looking at the girl who was frowning and thinking, and looking at the big red flower in her hair, he could not help but think of Zhou Yu, the military counselor who was once the closest to him. He thought of the past and friends in the Federation, and a smile appeared on his face. Do you know that your smile just now was really lewd? Zhong Huiyan glared at him and said angrily, thinking of Zhou Yu? I knew that you were hiding something shameful in your heart. She is your brother's woman. Can you not be so beastly? Is there anything more beastly than agreeing to your request? Su Lu reprimanded angrily. Zhong Huiyan lowered her head and muttered, anyway, I am not worse than Zhou Yu. After a moment of silence, Su Lu said with a serious expression, in fact, the most important reason is the attitude of the federal military. I think that the reason why no one dared to rescue Bob and Wood was because the 7 families did not dare to anger the military at this time. What if the federal army made their attitude clear? When a group of mechas surrounded Parliament Hill, who would dare to let the impeachment pass? If Pabre is really forced into a desperate situation, is it possible for him to mobilize the troops to wipe out the 7 families? This was the most tragic outcome, but it was also the most likely outcome. Otherwise, no matter what, the Federation government would not transfer Du Shaoqing and the Iron 7 Division back to S1 under the tense situation at the front lines. Uncle Tian still has a lot of troops in the West Woods. The Li family and Su Fei have been secretly supporting them. When I return to the West Woods, the Zhong family will not collapse unless the Federation government dares to start a civil war. But I can't say for the other families. Su Lu was silent. As a lowly orphan, he had never liked those big families. Fighting with the 7 families was a relatively happy part of his life. But now, in front of the cold ambition of the Federation government and the cold shadow of Pabre and Li Jidu, it seemed that they had no choice but to fight together. Is there a way to solve this? He asked. There is no way, Zhong Huiyan replied. Let's see if Lady Tai has any countermeasures. Also, if you are the crown prince of the empire now, you might be able to hold on for a while with a few thousand warships. Su Lu was silent for a long time before saying, if your plan doesn't work and we still end up here, then I'll do it my own way. Kill Pabre and Li Jidu. Going back again? Brother, why are you so stubborn? I've always been a stubborn person. The eyelashes covering her white and delicate skin trembled slightly. Zhong Huiyan, who was lying on the bed, had a pale face. Her lips were tightly pursed, and she appeared to be in extreme pain. Her small hand hanging by her side tightly grasped Su Li's hand, unwilling to let go for even a moment. The sharp alloy spike slowly retracted from the skin on the back of her neck. Because the wound was very small, not a single drop of blood seeped out. However, the bioelectric current released by the chip impacted her nerves, causing her to be in so much pain that she was about to faint. The surface of the metal bracelet was closed like flowing mercury, and the star-like chips were all blocked out. Su Lu held the girl in his arms and gently stroked her back. He comforted her. It doesn't hurt, it doesn't hurt. In the whole world, other than Feng Yu, he was the only one who had experienced the pain of replacing or installing the identity chip. He knew how unbearable it was. It doesn't hurt when you hold my hand. Zhong Huiyan opened her eyes and looked at him with difficulty. When she spoke, her tender lips showed traces of blood from biting her teeth. If you want to become the little princess of the Zhong family again, it's worth the pain. Su Lu smiled and comforted her. Zhong Huiyan tiredly blinked her eyes and said, "Without the chip on the back of my neck, I'm still the little princess of the Zhong family. No, the princess of the Zhong family." At this time, a slender mechanical arm came in front of the two with a whoosh. Philip said angrily, "If you want to flirt, why don't you change the time? I say, can you two hurry up? That piece of scrap metal has been staring at my ship for a long time. I finally found a spot in the light, so don't miss it." Zhong Huiyan's face was pale. She stared at the probe and said mockingly, "Nonsense, you let your ship arrogantly break into the Federation and can be seen with the naked eye. Do you think that the charter computer can't find you? I don't care whether that piece of scrap metal can find me or not. I just want to let the little staff of the Bureau of Proclamation at the checkpoint see." The slender mechanical arm shook angrily. Philip arrogantly announced, "I'm back." Su Lu was too lazy to pay attention to this mechanical life that had watched too many gangster movies. He looked at Zhong Huiyan and asked solemnly, "Are you ready?" Zhong Huiyan nodded vigorously. A few minutes later, under the light of the glory of the charter, the black broken spaceship that looked like a mountain of garbage suddenly exploded violently. The broken spaceship was blown into two pieces. One of the pieces flew at high speed and then exploded again at a certain place, exploding into a beautiful meteor shower. Like fireworks, it flew towards the West Woods. Chapter 945. The core of this dilapidated spaceship is the main body of the tri-winged spaceship that we're on. It can isolate the core signal. Su Lu pointed at the back of his neck and said to everyone in the cabin. He did not explain how this dilapidated spaceship could have such an ability. So, although we've entered the Federation's star sector, the government and the Bureau of Proclamation do not know that you're on this spaceship. The problem now is, we'll be landing on the surface of S1 in 47 standard hours. What should we do then? The metal bracelet was hidden in his sleeve. Su Lu could help everyone in the cabin change the chips on the back of their necks, giving them a brand new identity. However, the number of chips in the bracelet had already been used up by Feng Yu, so there was not enough. Moreover, this secret was too shocking. Even the most trusted members of the team would find it troublesome to update once they found out about this. So, I'll land first and find a way to deal with or delay the charter computer. You guys can go down after that. Su Lu looked at Dongfang Yu in the corner and asked, "What do you plan to do? If you still follow us, it'll be very dangerous. Also, your injuries haven't fully healed, so I suggest you stay on the spaceship." Team 7 landed on the surface and left Dongfang Yu alone on the spaceship. Su Lu knew that with Philip around, this former officer of the Iron 7th Division would not be a threat. However, this still represented some kind of trust. Dongfang Yu was silent for a moment before replying, "I'll take Xiao Gao to land. Don't worry about the Joint Investigation Department and Small Eyes Special Forces. I'll go find the commander." Su Lu thought about it and confirmed that this arrangement was suitable, so he nodded. Outside the spaceship's window, the stars in the distance appeared to be slightly denser. A faint, cold light appeared in the distance. Occasionally, a lonely comet with a short tail would pass by the edge of their vision. Su Lu calmly looked in that direction, thinking about the arrangements he had made in the cabin. Regarding the secret of the chip, even the members of Group 7 didn't dare to reveal it, and Uncle Feng Yu had just casually handed over the bracelet to him back then. No matter what Feng Yu's intentions were behind going to Dong Lin to protect him as he grew up, when he recalled the exchange of bracelets and watches when they parted at the mine, he still felt the warmth from his left wrist. He knew that it represented absolute trust. Dots of light condensed on the transparent porthole, and Philip brought up a distant star chart to display in front of him. He could clearly see 3 small galaxies that looked like white porcelain screws, quietly suspended in the space in front of him. These 3 star systems seemed to be very close to each other, but in fact they were still very far away from the spaceship. They were also several light years away from each other. They were S1, S2, and S3, which formed the Federation's capital ring. Then, light green streams of light flashed and appeared on the window, washing away the beautiful and tranquil star atlas and flowing down quickly. That piece of scrap iron has become powerful. his improvement is very obvious. At the very least, his improvement is greater than mine in the past 3 years. Speaking of which, there really isn't much room for improvement. The slender mechanical arm silently slid to Su Li's side, and the black probe was parallel to his eyes. Looking at the green streams of data on the window, Philip nervously said, "I connected to the charter network just now, but the invasion was not successful. That piece of scrap iron seems to have switched to a brand new explanation system. The overflowing streams of data are expressed in mechanical words, and I can't understand them." You often brag that you are the soul of that piece of scrap iron, and you still can't understand it? If I can enter its core body, I can naturally understand what it is thinking. The problem is that this guy actually doesn't fucking speak the Federation language. How am I supposed to understand the Empire's language? Su Li noticed that it was rare that Philip did not use words like scrap iron to describe the charter computer. Instead, he used the word guy to refer to it. You can understand the Empire's language. It's a metaphor, a metaphor. Philip angrily roared, I can read OOXX, but I can't understand 0101. Okay, then why are you telling me this? I want to tell you that through my calculations, I determined that there should be a federal fleet preparing to attack us in the 56 LYI star sector, but I don't know their specific spatial coordinates, and I don't know their firepower deployment. Su Li turned to look at the probe and said, and then? We just foolishly charge in and get blasted into a sky full of fireworks? Philip replied, if the warship's main cannon fires more than 1 astronomical unit away, I have enough time to calculate the evasive curve and then take countermeasures. According to my calculations, the success rate is very high. Then you have to know where that fleet is first. I didn't know before, but I know now. Where? Su Li was about to educate Philip not to talk like a third-rate philosopher, but then he noticed that the porthole in front of him suddenly changed. In the dark background of the universe, a huge fleet composed of more than 20 Feather-class warships faintly appeared. Looking at the magnificent fleet, Su Li slightly raised his eyebrows and let out a sigh of admiration. He reminded, it looks very close, you have to hurry. When the black broken spaceship discovered the Federation's 4th fleet, the 4th fleet also confirmed its spatial coordinates. The fleet commander, who had the highest authority of the Federation, issued the order to attack without any hesitation. From the moment the 4th fleet entered this star sector to carry out the interception mission, they were ready to attack. After the order was issued, the fleet quickly adjusted its posture, and then a hurricane seemed to blow in the vacuum. The 20 or so Federation warships floating in the deep universe were like toys being pulled by alloy strings. They suddenly fell back heavily and then quickly returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. The universe was silent, but at this moment, there seemed to be a lot of irritating wave impulses. Looking from the porthole where Su Li was, he could only vaguely see some weak white light spots slowly drifting over. As the distance closed, those light spots became brighter, wider, and thicker. It was not until this moment that Su Li finally confirmed that these light spots were the beams fired by the main cannons of the warships. However, because he was directly facing these beams, he could only see beautiful light spots. More than 20 milky white light beams were silent, but they carried the power to destroy heaven and earth. They instantly penetrated a large scale of the universe and attacked the enormous black broken spaceship. In just an instant, the death beams fired by the main cannons of the Federal fleet seemed to have arrived in front of the porthole. If there were no accidents, the next moment, the black broken spaceship would explode into miserable pieces like a bull that had been pierced by countless sharp arrows. However, when the main cannons of the Federal fleet were 0.4 astronomical units away from the black broken spaceship, the black broken spaceship automatically exploded. The preset devices between the countless internal components of the enormous black broken spaceship exploded on their own. The spaceship was blown into 6 or 7 pieces of broken spaceship. Then, according to the calculations in advance, following the perfect curve, the spaceship splashed out and flew away. The scene at that time was like a ripe, deformed watermelon covered in black paint being shot by a high-speed bullet. The bullet penetrated the watermelon and seemed to have caused serious damage, but in fact, most of the red and juicy flesh of the watermelon remained and scattered in the field. The Fourth Fleet of the Federation did not notice this detail. Many soldiers thought that the explosion was the result of the main cannons. Seeing the enemy's spaceship being destroyed so easily, loud cheers burst out from the inside of the 20 or so warships. If this fleet's commander had taken some time before the battle to study the enemy's broken black spaceship in detail, he definitely wouldn't have made a mistake after he had studied the process of half of the spaceship turning into fireworks during the spontaneous explosion at Cylin's border star region. However, there were no ifs on the battlefield. When the staff officer of the fleet confirmed the result of the battle, he finally noticed the abnormality of the explosion. Looking at the few pieces of broken spaceship on the screen, he was shocked. Why were the broken spaceships that should have turned into space garbage and wandered in space forever still so fast? If this speed was caused by the power of the explosion, why were they still able to change course? The only explanation was that the junk-like hulls still had power. The commander of the Fourth Fleet of the Federation listened to his subordinate's report and looked at the screen with a pale face. He saw the broken spaceships of the enemy's spaceships at 87 astronomical units sweep past like the most advanced light battleships. He angrily punched down. The target's broken spaceship had already swept past the fleet formation. Even if the fleet made an emergency turn, they would not have the chance to use the main cannons of the battleships to lock onto the target. Chase? Looking at the speed of the broken spaceship, it was clear that this was wishful thinking. After the explosion, the broken black spaceship took the initiative to decompose into 7 pieces. However, because the original spaceship was too large, even though it had now been decomposed into 7 pieces, the size of each piece was still astonishing. Xiong Linquan and the others looked at the shocked expression on each other's faces. Thinking of the terrifying milky white beam of light that had brushed past the porthole, thinking of the explosion that they had seen with their own eyes, and thinking of the part of the spaceship that had been used to lure the enemy and turned into ashes under the bombardment of the main cannons of the battleships, no one was able to speak for a long time. At this time, they finally understood why Sulu had patiently waited for so many days in the old dock in Bermuda. Why he had added so many seemingly useless broken parts to the exterior of this spaceship, turning himself into a fat beggar. Xiong Linquan touched the short hair on the top of his head that was like thorns and said emotionally, "Only when you grow bigger can you become smaller." It turns out that the boss's words really have nothing to do with philosophy. Decomposing to lure the enemy was the most primitive method of evasion in a battleship battle. Countless years ago, there was no commander who knew how to use this method. However, this broken black spaceship, with the support of Philip's powerful calculation ability and terrifying speed, dared to use this method to directly charge into the Federation. A fat beggar wearing countless thick cotton-padded jackets smeared with lard and possessing a pair of powerful driving legs that were like wind and fire wheels was indeed the most resistant existence in this world. The hatch opened, and Sulu, dressed in casual clothes, walked in. He tightened the military backpack on his body and said to his team members, "We'll be passing by the old moon base soon. Prepare for the S-1 landing operation." The team members began to silently prepare their firearms and equipment. Da Vinci sat in his wheelchair and looked at everyone calmly, hugging his military backpack tightly. The backpack was filled with the metal identity cards of the members of Group 7. According to the post-event statistics, if the base had sent the members to die in NTR, and the Federation's scheme in the Southwest War Zone had directly led to the deaths of 31 Group 7 members. The Federation was right in front of them. Their home was right in front of them. The atmosphere in the cabin was silent and somber. This was because they had not returned as war heroes but as traitors. They had returned not to rest, not to see their families, not to enjoy the cheers, but for revenge. Sulu silently looked at the men in the cabin. Looking at these men who dared to shoot vengeful bullets at the Federation government with only a few people, he suddenly felt a stirring emotion in his chest. He took a deep breath and asked, "Are you ready?" The team members with serious expressions saluted and replied in a deep voice, "Ready." After receiving the news that the Fourth Fleet had failed to intercept in the 56 LYI star sector, the various departments of the Federation government started to work at high speed again. As S1's last line of defense in space, the old moon base was no longer covered in dust and smoke. The heavy alloy valves had been opened, and dozens of devices that looked like oil wells exposed black pipes that were aimed in the direction of space. The charter computer had already calculated the trajectory of the enemy spaceship and even accurately calculated the fine traces of each of the 7 sections of the spaceship. No matter which section of the spaceship the target was hiding in, it would be destroyed by the fierce cannon fire. The old moon base was not equipped with normal anti-air cannons, but with light energy cannons. The Federation's most powerful crystal-excited light energy cannons were the heaviest burden to the increasingly scarce crystal resources. In order to maximize the mobility and lethality of the light energy cannons, they had never built a base on the ground. The double moon base had never had a defense against space attacks. Before the Dynasty's Ghost Fleet passed through the Gary Corridor, no Dynasty fleet had the ability to get close to the Federation's capital ring. It was only after the ancient clock was attacked that the Federation government started to increase the anti-air firepower on the double moon base. Especially in the past 3 years, the Federation government did not hesitate to spend a huge amount of money to build 2 light energy cannons on the old moon base and the new moon base. In the eyes of the normal Federation people, these expensive military installations were to defend against the invasion of the dynasty. However, the top officials of the government who knew the inside story were very clear that the 2 main cannons were built to welcome the return of a certain small-eyed man and that terrifying spaceship. It was all for today. While the soldiers of the old moon base were anxiously waiting, under the anxious gaze of the Federation government, the black tattered spaceship that made them feel endless fear and pressure finally returned with the small-eyed man who had left for 3 years. However, when the black tattered spaceship appeared in front of the Federation soldiers and appeared in the president's official residence, not many people could recognize that it was that spaceship. It was not because the spaceship had been broken into 7 sections, but because the 7 sections of the spaceship had violently exploded when they were 2.5 astronomical units away from the old moon base. Thousands of spaceship fragments, like densely packed meteorites, completely ignored the terrifying main cannons on the old moon base and flew over just like that. In the atmosphere of planet S1, countless fragments whistled and fell at high speed, leaving behind thousands of eye-catching tails. It was like a spectacular meteor shower that burned and cheered as it fell. Looking from outer space, it was like a beautiful firework had bloomed on the dark side of the planet. An incomparably huge firework. Chapter 946. Fireworks bloomed with thousands of petals. How could one guess which petal was the object that one wanted to extract or crush into red mud? At least, the soldiers on the old moon base could not guess. The charter computer, which had an extremely powerful computing power, seemed to have lost its train of thought in front of this firework made up of countless spluttering trajectories. On the automatic control screen connected to the old moon base, 35 data values vibrated violently, instantly exceeding the upper limit, and then suddenly stopped. Therefore, when the 7 pieces of the broken spaceship exploded into thousands of meteors and swept across the old moon, the dozens of light energy cannons that had been prepared for a long time still did not fire. Without precise coordinates, how many pieces could they hit even if they fired? Compared to thousands of pieces, it was meaningless. On the 2-dimensional light beam deep underground in the Charter Bureau, green data streams flowed quickly. There was a rare moment of stagnation, like the moment when a waterfall that was always falling was suddenly interrupted by a rock thrown by a naughty child. Although it was only a moment, it was an extremely critical moment. The charter computer's calculation program recovered, and after 2.3 seconds, it sent the most accurate calculation result to the old moon base. However, at this time, the black broken spaceship after the explosion had turned into countless pieces. Most of them fell into the atmosphere and became a beautiful meteor shower, while some pieces brushed past the edge of the atmosphere and bounced into the depths of the galaxy further away. Those pieces of spaceship that were bounced away by the atmosphere had no follow-up power, so their trajectories became slow and difficult to calculate. Among them, one of the pieces quietly sneaked into the asteroid belt. In the vast universe, it was just an insignificant piece of debris, but its actual size was still the size of a house. If one observed it closely, one might discover that under the outer layer of the ugly, charred, and abandoned metal parts, there was actually a dark black spaceship faintly appearing. The disguised spaceship was not hit by the dense debris of the asteroid belt, but in the frontmost control cabin, the slender mechanical arm shook violently for some reason, as if someone was excitedly waving its arm. 9,879 pieces of debris. Unsteady speed. Single unpredictable trajectory. Count my ass. You piece of scrap metal without a soul. You only know how to count according to human rules. Count until you feel dizzy and have a cerebral hemorrhage. Then I'll let you count as much as you want. In this universe, only I know what your calculation threshold is. Adding 25 redundant signals will make your supervalve brain paralysis. I'll count to death. The sharp voice resounded throughout the spaceship. Philip, who had obtained a complete victory, was extremely arrogant, like a queen with her hands on her hips. Thousands of fragments tore through the atmosphere and fell to the surface. A beautiful firework bloomed on the night surface of planet S1. The scene was so spectacular that even people on the ground could see it with their naked eyes. However, what they captured was countless meteor showers slanting across the night sky. Linhai Prefecture's black market butchers were carrying the gazelle's carcass onto a truck. Shixia Prefecture's girls were reminiscing about their lovers on the terrace. On the beach of Nank Prefecture, people were gathering around candles to mourn the soldiers who had died on the front lines. People subconsciously raised their heads and looked at the night sky illuminated by the shooting stars. Some narrowed their eyes, some prayed silently, and some smiled silently. A young couple had left their hometown for the capital to participate in the silent march. The old car that was spewing black smoke screeched to a halt beside the snow. Look, what is that? Lu Xing. The observatory didn't mention anything about a meteor shower recently. Don't say so much. Hurry up and make a wish, or it will be too late. A moment later, the girl asked, "What did you wish for?" The boy scratched his head and said, "I want the president to step down and be put on trial." The girl glared at him angrily, then leaned her head on his shoulder and whispered, "Even if you make a wish to Lu Xing, it's useless, right?" In the 76th year of the Constitutional Federation, the social atmosphere became more and more tense and depressing. The heavily damaged economy made the city depressed, but there were still many ordinary people who didn't care about politics. They bitterly clung to their daily lives. When this sudden meteor shower fell from the sky, many astronomy enthusiasts came out of their houses and walked in the direction of the meteor shower, hoping to find a meteorite as a souvenir in their lives. An astronomy enthusiast walked along the muddy field road in the suburbs and struggled to advance toward the grassy area. He was pleasantly surprised to find a clear trail in front of him. There was also a faint burnt smell in the air. Turning on the light, he tried to find a small burnt meteorite in the churning soil. But suddenly he found a huge black meteorite standing in front of him. The astronomy enthusiast opened his eyes wide and tightly covered his mouth. Only then did he discover that this huge black meteorite was actually a spaceship. In the long grass 3 kilometers away from here, a man carrying a military backpack silently walked out. He looked at the faintly visible lights in the distance. His thick black eyebrows slowly raised, and his eyes slightly narrowed, revealing a smile. Standing on the land where he had been separated for 3 years, Su Lu took a deep breath. The cold and tasteless air poured into his nose and moistened his lungs. He was incomparably happy. He took out the mobile phone specially made by Philip and skillfully dialed the number that he hadn't dialed in 3 years. The light blue light illuminated the beard on his lips. After the call was connected, the blue light disappeared. He paused for a moment and said with a smile, "I'm back." The raging snowstorm and low temperature were the best way to extinguish human enthusiasm. The invasion of the cold air in Linhai made the entire northern hemisphere feel cold. In such an environment, Even making love would be stiff and uninteresting, let alone a dangerous demonstration that had no fun to begin with. Since November of last year, the silent march slowed down their pace toward the capital. Because of the snowstorm in the Federation and the low temperature in the political atmosphere, many people left, and even more people chose to stay in a stadium. Mrs. Macho had been silent, but the Sanlin United Bank scornfully ignored the cold warning of the government and continued to send a steady stream of support to Tai Ziyuan. Money would always be the most powerful ammunition in human society. With money, one could buy everything. Therefore, no matter how heavy the snowstorm was, all kinds of supplies needed for the silent march could be freely provided. The gymnasium and the adjacent rented apartments were in good order, and no problems occurred. There are no problems now, but it doesn't mean there will be no problems forever. If anything goes on for too long, it's easy to fall into a tired and irritable mood. In a brightly lit office building 2 kilometers away from the stadium, the staff of the headquarters were busy arranging various specific matters in the hall. There were only 2 people in the office on the top floor. Zhou Yu, wearing a bright red snow coat hanging on the hanger, looked at the thin young member of parliament behind the desk, frowned her delicate eyebrows and said, "The current situation is actually very clear. The key points are the Patriot Act and the investigation of the ancient bell. In order to make a breakthrough in these 2 issues, we have to rescue Bob and Wood. Why haven't we started the work yet?" "How do we start?" Tai Ziyuan covered his mouth with his fist, coughed softly, looked at his former deskmate, and said calmly, "The Patriot Act has not been abolished. The Federation government requires them to be investigated. Of course, it is absolutely unreasonable to hold them in custody for a year, but it is legal. What can we do?" Zhou Yu looked at him without any emotion. "Instead of continuing to argue about this issue," she said directly, "according to the information I have received, the place where Bob and Wood are being held, other than the special forces of Small Eyes, there is only a battalion of the 4th Brigade. If you mobilize Black Hawk's troops to attack, it won't be difficult." Tai Ziyuan slowly frowned, looked at her for a moment, and replied, "Using violence is absolutely not in line with our political beliefs. Do you want me to solve a mistake with the wrong means like President Pabre? This has nothing to do with the means. There are no protesters or voters in this office. We can make it more clear." Zhou Yu was not moved and said coldly, "Regarding the case of Bob and Wood, the 7 families are not willing to do anything. In addition to wanting to anger the public, I know very well that you are more worried about forcing the military to take a stand. But haven't you thought about the fact that the military has already taken a stand? Li Jiedu himself showed his stand, and Du Xiaoqing was willing to withdraw from the front line, which is even more so. But at least now the Federation government has not yet, and does not dare to use the military against the spirit of the Charter and the pressure of public opinion. If we start to use armed forces like Black Hawk, the government will have the best excuse." Tai Ziyuan looked at her, shook his head, and said, "We or the government, no matter who starts to use armed forces, we will not be able to clean up the mess in the future." Zhou Yu looked at his eyes and confirmed that he would not change his mind. She sighed softly and said, "Yuan, although I admit that you are very excellent, even better than I thought when I was a child, I have to say that you still have the conservative taste of those families." She leaned against the edge of the table and turned around, looking at the snow outside the window. After a moment of silence, she continued, "If it is Su Lu, this matter will be much simpler." Tai Ziyuan also fell into silence, then lowered his head and began to deal with the complicated affairs. He seemed to say inadvertently, "I heard that he is coming back." Zhou Yu's eyebrows slightly raised, and when she was about to say something, the phone in her hand suddenly rang. The ringtone was clear and melodious. There was no incoming number. She looked at the special encrypted phone in her hand, somewhat puzzled. Because she was not sure whether to answer or not, the ringtone rang for a long time. "After you left, no one bought porridge in the library of Linhai State, no raindrops under the stadium, no sequel to that documentary, only real stones left in the mines of Donglin." Tai Ziyuan behind the table looked up, listening to the song called "Fleeting Years" that was banned by the Federation, and listening to Jian Shui's voice, he revealed a reminiscing smile. Zhou Yu answered the phone and softly said hello. The soft hello seemed to be from 3 years ago. Her beautiful eyes suddenly stiffened, and then slowly bloomed like the petals of the red flower behind her head. Without saying anything to Tai Ziyuan, she tightly held the phone, took the red snow coat from the hanger, and pushed open the side door to walk to the balcony. Xue Ziyuan noticed the nervousness and surprise on her face. He looked at the eye-catching red figure on the balcony and fell into deep thought. The soft snowflakes slowly fell under the balcony, not dense but sparse, just like the faint smile on Zhou Yu's face at this time. My phone has been monitored by the government, but don't worry about anything. The small-eyed man on the other side of the phone smiled and replied, I know that you are now working for Tai Ziyun. Don't worry, if you can't deal with the government's monitoring, you don't need to fight this battle. You didn't call a Yuan, but called me. It seems that you don't want to contact him for the time being, so I didn't tell him just now. Su Lu paused for a moment and then explained in a low voice, even if he is my best friend, after all, I am now a citizen of the empire, I don't know what he will think. Zhou Yu smiled sweetly, her eyes like flowers, and said softly, Are you not a citizen of the empire to me? Su Lu knew how to explain, and directly cut to the main topic. Zhou Yu brushed away the snowflakes on her bangs and said calmly and seriously, To save Bob and Wood, you have chosen a very good starting point. She continued, I also think that it should be done, but big families have their limitations. People who are used to secretly influencing history are always too reserved, afraid of aggravating conflicts and angering the military, so they don't dare to make a move. Su Lu replied, I am not afraid, I will do it, the question is how to do it. Hearing his answer, Zhou Yu felt very comfortable. She hadn't heard such harsh words for 3 years, and she missed it. Lin Banshan is playing hide-and-seek with the government. He brought a lot of people from Bermuda, and he has a lot of power at the bottom of the Federation. If you need a middle channel, he is the most suitable person, the key is whether you can trust each other. My question now is, who in the Federation can trust a citizen of the Empire? Lin Banshan has lived in Bermuda for a long time, his concept of country should be more indifferent. Zhou Yu hesitated for a moment before continuing, but this person is very difficult to see through. First of all, you have to ensure your own safety. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and Su Lu replied with a slightly bitter voice, His favorite woman and only son are in my hands now, he probably won't sell me. If during or at the end of this war, Lin Banshan was ambitious and wanted to destroy Su Lu, the crown prince of the empire, in the Federation, Su Lu believed that Li Wei on Pop Star would definitely not hesitate to directly deal with Li Feirong and the boy named Lin Shihua. The snowflakes were getting thicker, and the wind was getting stronger. The temperature of the balcony at night dropped a few degrees. Zhou Yu looked at the stadium on the other end of the wind and snow indifferently and said, 3 years ago, you would never have said such a thing. Su Lu laughed awkwardly on the other end of the line and replied, You still know me so well. Yes, at most, I was just scaring him. Zhou Yu's hand that was holding the phone relaxed a little, and the smile on her lips became more relaxed. But before contacting Lin Banshan, I still have something to do. I need your help with this matter. Help me find the whereabouts of a person. I have some information, but because it's not first-hand, I can't confirm it. No problem. Of course, before everything else, there's something I have to do first. Zhou Yu smiled faintly and said, Gather your 7 teams. It was snowing in the capital, but it was raining in Philadelphia. Although it was in the temperate zone, the rain in late winter was still bone-chilling. Dr. Jiang Rui walked out of the apartment building and looked at the cold rain on the street. Only then did he remember that he did not have an umbrella. He took out a white handkerchief to wipe off the lipstick stain under his chin. Thinking of the hot body of the young woman in the building, he could not help but smile. Because of something back then, Dr. Jiang offended some big shots and was slapped several times by the pretty nurse. He no longer had the face to stay in the Army General Hospital, so he came to a private hospital in Philadelphia. At the very beginning, he was scared out of his wits. He always remembered the threats of those big shots at that time. He worked honestly and never dared to provoke female nurses again. He didn't even dare to have a serious relationship. Even his colleagues in the hospital began to suspect his sexual orientation. However, as time passed, especially when the big shot that he was most afraid of suddenly became a sinner that was despised by the people. The name of that organization seemed to have disappeared from the news media. Dr. Jiang no longer had any fear and officially began his beautiful life of seeking pleasure. The rain kept falling. Dr. Jiang saw a taxi parked at the corner of the street. He could not help but laugh at his poor eyesight. He whistled to call the taxi over. The sky gradually turned dark, and the street seemed to be much darker. Dr. Jiang got into the taxi, wiped the rain off his body, and reported his address. He did not notice what the taxi driver looked like at all. Then he gradually felt something strange because he had never taken a taxi so fast. He had never met a taxi driver with such good driving skills. Yes, it was said that the fastest driver in the world was a taxi driver. However, this taxi actually took less than 5 minutes from Al Street in Harbor City to Huan Wharf when waiting for the red light. Dr. Jiang Rue suddenly remembered that he was not going to Huan Wharf. He looked at the heavy rain outside the window and the dark wharf in the rain. He could not help but steal a glance at the front and thought in horror, "Did I meet the legendary taxi demon in the rainy night?" The taxi stopped at a remote and dark alley. The taxi driver in the driver's seat slowly turned his head and looked at him expressionlessly. Dr. Jiang Rui, who could not open the door, saw the driver's face and screamed in fear, but found that his scream could not penetrate the heavy rain at all. Then he found that the driver in front of him had a very ordinary face and did not look ferocious. "How much money do you want? I'll give you." Dr. Jiang took out his wallet with trembling hands, took out the cash and threw it on the front passenger seat. He said in horror, "I don't want you to take me home. Just let me get off here." The ordinary-looking driver looked at him coldly, punched Dr. Jiang hard in the nose, and scolded, "Do I look like someone who lacks money?" Dr. Jiang covered his bleeding nose and cried, "Then what do you want?" The wind of the punch whistled again. The screams in the taxi were even louder than the storm outside, but it could not suppress the driver's angry roar. "What do you want? Where's your promise? Dating? Picking up girls? Do you think all the 7 groups are dead?" Chapter 947. In the heavy rain, the taxi was screaming. The door was suddenly opened, and Dr. Jiang Rui was pushed out of the car. Covering his bruised and bleeding face, he collapsed in the rain and cried in a low voice, looking very miserable. The tires rotated at a high speed, creating 2 fierce splashes, whistling away from the remote alley of the Huan Pier and instantly disappeared in the rainy night. At dawn, the yellow taxi quietly stopped outside a community in Harbor City. The ordinary-looking driver silently looked at the community gate, looked at the time, put out the cigarette in his hand, and then sprayed some air freshener into the car. He was responsible for sending a boy to school every morning, which was a stable income. However, the boy's rich mother was very picky, arrogant, and rude. If she smelled the smell of smoke in the taxi, she would scold him again. Thinking of the woman's sarcastic face, the taxi driver couldn't help but shake his head and roll down the window, hoping that the morning wind could blow away all the smell. Because of the war, the Federation's supply of materials had been very tight in the past 2 years. The price of hybrid taxis, whether it was filled with hydrogen or charged by electricity stations, was constantly soaring. The taxi drivers wanted to maintain their income, so they had to pay more attention to their daily expenses, except for the common method of taking a detour to kill strangers. Therefore, although the morning wind in January was a bit cold, he still didn't turn on the air conditioner, but just lifted the collar of his overalls. The collar could warm his numb cheeks, but it couldn't warm his abdomen. The sequela of being shot in the abdomen on the battlefield made his abdomen ache every time he felt cold. The taxi driver's face was slightly pale, and he rubbed his abdomen. Thinking of the people he hadn't seen for a long time, who once mocked him for having rheumatism, he couldn't help but show a self-deprecating smile. His name was Lu Jiao, a member of the first 7 groups. Lu Jiao had been retired for many years, and didn't participate in the face-slapping activity against Dr. Jiang Rui on the spring rainy night in the capital. But last month, he learned about it from a member's phone call and knew that the doctor was now in Harbor City, so he decided to supervise without hesitation. It was not good to run a taxi business at night, so it was very good to take some time to relive the feeling of carrying out the mission. Thinking of the doctor who painfully rolled in the rain last night, Lu Jiao smiled happily, and then noticed that the iron fence of the community gate was slowly opening. The young employer and his troublesome mother were about to come out. Lu Jiao shook her head and turned on the air conditioner. She took a rag and got out of the car. Just as he was about to wipe the taxi even cleaner, a burly man walked over and introduced himself directly. "I'm from Black Eagle." Lu Jiao slowly narrowed her eyes, looked at him and said, "What's the matter?" The man looked at him and said, "We want to recruit you." After a moment of silence, Lu Jiao shook her head and replied in a low voice, "I've been working in Whitewater for too many years. I'm tired of it. Don't come looking for me again." In Group 7, the new Division 17 in our circle, you've always been recognized as the best pilot. What we're talking about here is driving in all directions, whether it's a mecha, an armored vehicle, or even a spaceship. The head of recruitment from Blackhawk looked at him with a solemn expression and said, "But it shouldn't include taxis. It's a pity for someone like you to drive a taxi." It had been a long time since Lu Jiao had heard the praise of a professional. At this time, his expression was a bit complicated. After a moment, he smiled bitterly and said, "You should know very well that the government has been watching people like us. Other than driving a taxi, I can't do anything else." Whether the members of Group 7 were on the front line or retired, they were always the target of the Federation government's surveillance. It didn't matter if they beat up a doctor with no background like last night, but it would be very troublesome to re-enter a place like Blackhawk. The regret on the head of Blackhawk was very sincere. "What a pity." Then he took out a business card and handed it over, saying, "If the situation changes in the future, please call this number directly. My branch is now directly under Miss So. She values you very much. This is her number." Miss So should be the daughter of the minister in the Wangdu apartment? Lu Jiao held the business card with two fingers and frowned at the back of the head of Blackhawk. He casually glanced at the phone number on the business card. Then he subconsciously turned the business card. There were 4 handwritten words on the back of the business card, and there was also an inconspicuous but very clear mark. Any small mercenary team that carried out the private work of the Federation government had their own secret symbol, and Group 7 was no exception. And this secret symbol continued until the entire team was incorporated into the federal forces and entered the new 17th Division. That mark was Group 7's secret symbol. Other than the team members themselves, no one else should know about it, but now it appeared on the business card. The 4 handwritten words on the back of the business card were, "Gather and wait for orders." Lu Jiao looked at the 4 words and the mark. In an instant he thought of countless things in the past, the smoke-filled battlefield, and the smoke-filled barracks. His eyebrows raised, his eyes suddenly brightened, and the corners of his mouth twitched nervously, as if he wanted to smile, but he forcefully suppressed this smile, and in the end, it turned into a series of soft whistles between his lips. "I say, why are you still standing there? Hurry up and wipe off the mud here. What a lazy guy. It clearly rained so heavily last night, but you didn't know to wash the car in advance." A young woman holding a little boy next to the taxi shouted at him angrily. Lu Jiao was stunned for a moment, and then replied softly, "Wash your mom." The woman's face became extremely pale. She raised her trembling arm and pointed at his face and roared, "You don't want to work anymore." Lu Jiao ignored her and got into the taxi with the blue anti-shedding cloth. Accompanied by the sharp sound of tires grinding, he just left. The woman stood on the street dumbfounded. She didn't know what happened that made the usually honest and timid taxi driver become like this. The cold wind outside the window blew on Lu Jiao's slightly hot cheeks. After memorizing the number, he chewed up the business card and swallowed it into his stomach. Only then did he realize that the fiber paper actually tasted so good. So, he happily hummed a tune and whistled while driving the yellow taxi around the streets of Harbor City. From now on, he dared to refuse to take passengers. "Remember to go to the market to buy onions." I don't want to eat the fried synthetic meat tonight. Because of her age and childbirth, the head nurse's figure was slightly out of shape. Of course, she would not allow her husband to say anything about it. She picked up the lady's bag and hurried to the door. She turned back and hugged her husband, kissing him on the cheek. Suddenly, she looked into his eyes and said seriously, "If you really feel bored, do you want to find something to do? We don't lack money. In fact, if you feel tired, you don't have to go to the hospital to work." Bai Yulan replied with a smile. His wife glared at him. After the door closed, Bai Yulan began to clean the house and dry the clothes. He began his day as a full-time house husband. It was snowing outside the balcony. He stood under the sun lamp and stood under the flag-like clothes. He took out a cigarette box from the end of the drying rack. After taking out a cigarette, he lit it and greedily took a deep breath. After years of living at home without a job, if it were other men, they would feel very uncomfortable and lonely. However, Bai Yulan had never felt this way. He was very comfortable and even enjoyed it. Before the age of 16, he started to pick up guns, kill people, and commit arson for the government. Although it could not be said that he committed all kinds of crimes, it could be said that he was used to seeing the wind and rainfall. This kind of experienced man would always be calmer than ordinary people once he returned to the peaceful days of the secular world. It was just making the bed, folding the quilt, cooking and washing the dishes. Back then, he was bought by that hateful guy for 20 million to be his personal secretary. He was already used to doing these things. How could he feel uncomfortable or conflicted? Light blue smoke filled the balcony. Bai Yulan smiled as he looked at the snowflakes outside the window. He was satisfied with the warmth beside him. The unique cold and feminine aura that he used to have had long been tempered by his family and relatives. He subconsciously raised his hand with the cigarette in it and wanted to use his thumb to lift the fine strands of hair on his forehead. His fingers did not touch anything. Only then did he realize that he had already cut his hair short and clean. The power of habit was still so strong. Bai Yulan shook his head and laughed at himself. Just like the cigarette between his fingers, he still could not quit even after 2 years. A child's shout came from the room. Bai Yulan's expression changed dramatically. He hurriedly opened the balcony window and threw out the remaining half of the cigarette. Then he pulled a towel and fanned desperately, hoping to fan away the smell of the cigarette. "Dad, you're smoking again." His 3-year-old son was holding a toy gun and staring at him angrily. His finger was on the trigger, as if he could shoot the punishment bullet at any time. Bai Yulan smiled awkwardly, squatted down and said, "Don't tell your mom." His son giggled and said, "Then I want to watch TV." Bai Yulan was silent for a moment. He was ready to use the authority of a father, but he realized that he was destined to be the loser in this war. He silently entered the parental control password and turned on the TV screen on the living room wall. The Federation's news channel was broadcasting a war documentary. After post-processing, there was not much blood and limbs on the screen. There was only the bravery of the federal forces and the cowardice and stupidity of the Empire's enemies. Therefore, Bai Yulan was not worried that his 3-year-old son would be influenced by these war documentaries into a psychopathic killer. But he could not understand why such a young child did not like to watch cartoons, but held a toy gun and watched war documentaries excitedly every day. Was this the so-called strong biological marker genetic effect? "My good son, what is your dream when you grow up?" Bai Yulan sat on the floor of the sofa with a can of beer in his hand. He felt very comfortable. Looking at his son who was holding a toy gun and shooting at the Empire's people on the screen, he suddenly asked a stupid question that all parents would ask. His son turned around, shook his butt and shouted excitedly, "I want to be a soldier. I want to be a hero." Then, the little boy pointed at several black mecha roaring at high speed on the television and said loudly, "Daddy, I want to be a mecha." Bai Yulan's hand that was holding the can of beer froze. She looked at the familiar mecha on the screen and narrowed her eyes. He rarely talked about his past at home. Even his wife only knew that he was a very rich retired military officer. She didn't know the details of his life. Just because he did not talk about it did not mean that he never thought of it or missed it. That was the glory and pride of the first half of Bai Yulan's life. In fact, he had always wanted to relive those memories through narration, but he could not find a suitable person to talk to. Do you know the serial number of this mecha? He looked at his son and asked tentatively. His son replied loudly, yes, it's MX. The person who designed the MX mecha is a friend of your father's. Bai Yulan finally couldn't hold it in any longer. She took a sip of her beer and smiled as she introduced herself. The earliest failed MX mecha in the Federation was tested by me, your old man. Later on, the successful MX mecha you see now were also tested by me, your old man. Don't you think your old man is awesome? The little boy hugged the toy gun tightly in his arms and stared at him for a long time. Frowning, he said, Daddy, other than smoking, you also lie. That's not good. The MX mecha and Group 7 were the greatest pride of his life, but in front of his son, this pride became evidence of his lies. Bai Yulan, whose self-esteem had been damaged, continued to drink with an ugly expression, not saying another word. The phone in the crack of the sofa made a soft beeping sound. Bai Yulan reached in and searched for it for a long time before finding it. He was a little puzzled. Who would contact him? Or was it another damned piece of junk mail? His gaze fell on the email address that he had not seen for many years. Bai Yulan's expression suddenly became sharp. He silently put down the beer, walked into the bedroom, and printed out the email. Then he took out a ruler and tilted it 30 degrees. It was the simplest encryption method that few people would use. When the ruler leaned against it, a line of text was clearly displayed. Looking at it in a fixed order, for words could be seen, gather and wait for orders. Bai Yulan destroyed the email and printed paper in the fastest speed possible. Then he walked to the balcony and took out the hidden blue box 37. Looking at the snow outside the window, he lit another cigarette and was silent for a long time. Daddy, you're smoking again. Good boy, play by yourself first. I'll let you continue watching TV tomorrow. Long live Daddy. Bai Yulan smiled at his son who was jumping on the sofa. After walking into the kitchen, the smile on his face quickly disappeared. After that, he stayed in the kitchen and did not come out again. No one knew what he was doing inside. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, his wife took the subway back from work at the Army General Hospital. The tired head nurse threw her bag on the sofa and scolded her son. Then she walked into the kitchen and looked around. Frowning, she asked, "Where are the onions?" Bai Yulan stood up from the sink. His expression was a little nervous as he answered, "The sink is broken. I spent the whole day fixing it and forgot to buy a new one." His wife sighed helplessly. She opened the cabinet and found that even the green pepper was gone. She shook her head and said, "Forget it, let's eat noodles tonight." She walked into the bedroom to change her clothes, but her voice did not stop. "Xiaobai, I want to introduce a boyfriend to our unit's Huang Li. She's not young anymore, but she's still alone. It's really pitiful to see her like this." "Then introduce him." Bai Yulan squatted beside the sink and answered casually, "I just want to ask if you have any suitable comrades that I can introduce to her. What's so good about being a soldier? He's too rough." Bai Yulan replied. His wife poked her head out of the bedroom and said with a smile, "Aren't you good? You're more meticulous than a woman. How are you rough?" If she had said this on a normal day, she would have been met with a lewd reply, followed by a burst of intense entanglement. However, the man in the kitchen was clearly not in the mood for that today. "Speaking of which, I saw those comrades of yours in the hospital a few years ago. They're really good people. We didn't hold a wedding banquet, but they actually gathered so many people. You're really too much. Since we're all friends, we should hang out more." Bai Yulan stood up from the sink and replied with a smile, "We'll hang out." In front of his feet, the secret door under the sink was slowly closing. Inside, there were 7 different military firearms of different specifications that glowed with a metallic luster. Guns that had not been touched for many years needed to be cleaned and maintained until the cold light reappeared. All it took was a letter, an order to assemble, and a day's time. Shihang opened a cake shop in Xixia State. Because of his relationship with the De family, the business was quite good. The girls in the shop were exceptionally beautiful. There were many members who lived a good life like him. After retiring from the army, they were slowly reintegrating into society and into the circle that they originally belonged to. 2 years ago, Jiang Jin opened a chain of cinemas with the support of his family. Then, he wanted to invite one of the old members who had retired from the army at the same time as him to be the manager. However, the old member said, "I used to be your boss in the army, but now you want to be my boss? No way." Jiang Jin was sweating profusely. He cursed, stamped his feet, and begged until he was about to kneel down. The old member finally agreed to his request, but insisted that he was not qualified to be the manager and was only willing to be a cleaner in the cinema. The cinema was in Nank State, a place where the underworld ran amok. A small gang did not know the family background of the cinema owner, let alone that the young boss had 7 sets of resumes. Therefore, the small gang tried to collect protection fees. Then, when they rushed into the cinema to cause trouble, they encountered a middle-aged, downtrodden man holding a broom. Leaving behind the bodies of 7 unconscious members, the small gang finally understood that the joke on the internet was true. Every company had a cleaner who couldn't afford to be hurt. The members of the first 7 sets scattered around the planet were still under the Federation's surveillance after they retired from the army. Like Lu Jiao and Bai Yulon, they lived in silence and honesty. Some were holding a board meeting of a pharmaceutical company, some were promoting their own insurance, and some were staring blankly at the blue sky and white clouds on the beach in the southern hemisphere, as if they wanted to see the clouds as smoke on the battlefield. One day, they saw 4 words through various channels. Then, the board meeting continued. The lips of the salesman were still sharp. The person who was looking at the scenery was still watching. The cinema was still clean. The little girl in the cake shop was still blushing because of the little boss's teasing. No one knew that they had begun to prepare in silence. They were preparing to welcome their comrades who had been separated from them for 3 years, to receive new orders, and to prepare for battle. 7 sets were assembled. Chapter 948. Fireworks bloomed in the night sky of S1. Another firework lit up the West Woods, announcing to everyone that fireworks had returned to the West Woods. 80 of the latest MX military mechas, 400 heavy armored vehicles, and more than 10,000 elite ground troops of the 4th Military Region left their respective bases and gathered in the southern part of the Sunset State, forming a destructive torrent of iron and steel. The Zhong family's relatives scattered all over the country, the Federation military representatives in the Golden Star Hotel, the state governments, and all the other forces turned their attention to the terrifying troops. When they confirmed that these military movements were not authorized by the federal military and that even the 4th Military Region's headquarters did not know the reason, they knew that there was a fat and fierce figure hiding behind this troop. Ceylon television station had sent out 5 satellite broadcast vehicles and 2 reporting teams to the front and back of this mixed army respectively. They were responsible for broadcasting live footage to the entire Ceylon region. As the steel flood advanced towards the depths of the grasslands, the Ceylon citizens, who were originally somewhat uneasy, became agitated when they guessed or learned of this army's goal through the internet. At the end of the steel torrent, in front of a charred spaceship protected by the Zhong family's special forces deep in the grasslands, a black-haired girl in a white dress stood quietly. The steel torrent quieted down the moment they saw the girl in the white dress. The dozens of tall and mighty MX mechas around them slowly bent their right mechanical legs, their huge bodies leaning forward clumsily to welcome the return of the princess. Zhong Huiyan looked at the steel troop on the grasslands, looked at the shaky camera lens, and said with a smile, "I'm back. It's been hard on you all these years." Zhong Huiyan, who had been away for 3 years, returned to the West Woods. The treatment she received was completely different from that of her brother. She did not need to sneak through the grasslands like a mouse like Su Lu, carefully contacting his subordinates. She was the only heir of the Zhong family, and she was the beloved princess of the West Woods. Her return was so righteous and impressive. Marching from the grasslands in the south of Sunset State to the state capital, the troop passed by the highway. All the vehicles on the highway consciously avoided the emergency lane, giving the wide road in the middle to this mighty troop that had traveled more than 10 kilometers. When the black bulletproof sedan in the middle of the procession passed by their vehicles, the people in the driver's seat desperately honked their horns to express the warmest welcome. Along the way, the car that Zhong Huiyan was in entered the prefecture of Sunset State under heavy protection. After entering the city, the atmosphere became even more lively. The citizens who saw the live broadcast of the news walked onto the streets and crowded on both sides of the road, waving their arms and shouting her name. The middle-aged people who had been remembering Commander Zhong even shed tears of excitement. The students and naughty children riding bicycles followed the motorcade and ran forward. Some of the bolder ones shouted, "Little princess, I love you." Zhong Huiyan rolled down the window and waved to the people who welcomed her. Her waving was very small and elegant, but the smile on her face was so sincere that she looked like a princess who had returned from a long marriage. If Philip saw her now, he would definitely not equate this elegant daughter of a wealthy family with the sarcastic little girl on the spaceship. Due to many historical problems in the past, coupled with the strategy formulated by war god Li Pifu, the Westwoods had sacrificed a lot of blood for the Federation, but they had never received the corresponding economic and political support. Therefore, the Westwood Society and the Capital Ring had always been aloof. It could even be said that all the Westwoods people had always held a grudge against the Federation, especially when the news started to spread and some media started to accuse the Federation government of plotting the explosion of the ancient clock. This grudge had long turned into hatred. In the eyes of the Westwoods people, the Federation government and President Pabre had to pay the price for the deaths of Commander Zhong, his wife, and thousands of Westwoods elite soldiers. However, after Zhong Shouhu's death, the Federation government colluded with some members of the Zhong family to strengthen their infiltration and control of the Westwoods. The Westwoods people were angry, but they did not dare to say anything. With anger hidden in the chest, it was easy to feel sad. Just like the famous Westwoods nursery rhyme, the Westwoods people felt that they had become orphans. With such sadness, whether it was transferring the Westwoods troops to the front line of the Zhuotian galaxy or any other normal policy, as long as it came from the Federation government, the people would be angry and think that it was a conspiracy to suppress the Westwoods. Grief could not be converted into strength, and the Sillin citizens who had lost their backbone could only complain after drinking. They could only curse at the Capital Ring in the night sky, but they could not do anything about it, until today. Their little princess had returned. She was the rightful successor of the ancient clock company and the rightful successor of the Zhong family of the Westwoods by the Supreme Court of the Federation. Whether it was in front of the TV or on both sides of the street, everyone who saw the girl smiling and waving by the car window felt their backs straighten a little. In the car, Mr. Tian narrowed his eyes and looked at the street ahead, listening to the military reports that came in from time to time. Although there were snipers on the buildings along the way, he was still very worried when he saw the young lady rolling down the window and waving. She had not returned for 3 years. What if something happened? Uncle Tian, this is something that must be done. The TV station is broadcasting it live. Zhong Huiyan smiled and waved at the people outside the window. Because she had smiled for too long, the muscles on her cheeks were a little stiff. She did not turn around and explain softly. I haven't returned for 3 years. I have to let everyone know what I look like now. And the bigger the show, the less pressure I will have over there. Many years ago, Mr. Tian had accompanied the young Zhong Huiyan to participate in several political activities in the Westwoods. At that time, when he saw the little girl's near-perfect political performance on the stage, he knew that she was extremely talented in this field. He shook his head and sighed, no longer persuading her. However, he was still full of resentment towards Su Lu, who had abducted the young lady and left home for 3 years. Whether that guy was the crown prince of the empire or a hero of the Federation, if Su Lu dared to appear in front of him now, he would definitely be beaten to a pulp. The convoy drove into Latitude 2 and followed the straight road in front of Red Oil Restaurant. Just as they were about to enter the old mansion area, they were stopped by a group of Federation officials. A more accurate description would be that this group of pale Federation officials were surrounded by troops loyal to the Zhong family of the Westwoods. Anyone who was shrouded in the shadow of the military-use Mecca would feel fear. However, the Bureau of Proclamation official at the front still mustered up his courage and shouted to the black car in front, "Bureau of Proclamation Inspection." Zhong Huiyan calmly got out of the black car and waved her hand to signal for her subordinates to make way. She slowly walked up to the Bureau of Proclamation official and said, "Please hurry up." With a soft beep, the data of the chip behind her neck was instantly collected. The Bureau of Proclamation official looked at the in-depth information on the screen and his expression turned extremely ugly. He bowed slightly and said, "There are no problems." However, a few Federation officials dressed in black beside him still had questions. One of them cleared his throat and walked up to her and said, "We are from the Joint Investigation Department. We would like to invite Miss Zhong Huiyan to come back with us for investigation." Zhong Huiyan looked at the official coldly and turned to get into the car. The official shouted angrily, "You have to be investigated." Zhong Huiyan turned again and said without any emotion on her face, "What can you do if I don't go? Can your department go up against my troops? Do you dare to use your private forces to go against the Federation's investigation?" The official said angrily, "You have to know that if you do so, it's equivalent to treason." In front of the huge metal mecha, the girl in the white dress looked exceptionally small and weak. She looked at the other party with a smile and asked, "Even if it's treason, what can you do?" There was a dead silence. The Federation officials looked at each other and did not know how to answer this question. If the Federation accused the little princess of the Zhong family of treason and she really did betray them, what could the Federation do? Then, Zhong Huiyan looked at her cousin who was cowering behind the officials, whom she had not seen for a long time. She frowned and said in disgust, "Zhong Erlang, for the sake of relatives, I won't kill you today. Go back to your little satellite and never come back." The joint investigation official lowered his stance and said almost pleadingly, "Miss Zhong, because this matter is too serious, you should at least let us ask a few questions. Only those who are suspected of committing a crime need to answer questions." "Am I a suspect?" The official wiped away the cold sweat on his forehead and said, "The entire universe knows that you've been together with the Empire's prince, Su Lu, for the past 3 years, so what?" Zhong Huiyan raised her brows and looked at him mockingly. "You've been together with this idiot, Zhong Erlang, every day. Are you a lunatic? Then do I have to lock you up in a mental hospital?" A mental hospital was a mental hospital. As the creatures with the most developed brains, the human brain was also the easiest to have problems. Therefore, the Federation had many mental hospitals. These mental hospitals were strictly controlled and it was not convenient to enter or leave. One of them was a specialized military mental hospital located in the southern hemisphere of S1. It was even more strictly supervised. It was unknown which level of instructions came from the military, but there was an infantry squad stationed here all year round. With 2 crisp sounds, Su Lu slowly put down a soldier in his hand without letting him make any noise. After confirming that everyone in the room was unconscious, he took the key and walked into the mental hospital. Because too much time had passed since that incident, the federal military's attention to that person had severely decreased. It was even possible that they had forgotten the existence of that person and that infantry squad. Therefore, he was not worried about alerting the other party. He silently moved forward in the deep and dark passageway of the mental hospital. He only needed to be careful to avoid the doctors and nurses. The mental hospital was filled with the pungent smell of medicine. There were even faint traces of urine on the white walls. It was probably a masterpiece left behind by a patient who had lost control of himself. He slowly pushed open the door to the ward, only to find that there was no one on the bed. Su Lu narrowed his eyes and then noticed that the window facing the north was filled with all kinds of mathematical symbols and complex formulas. Even he felt that it was abnormally difficult. After looking at it silently for a moment, he walked out of the ward and continued to look for his target. Walking in the quiet mental hospital, there were no screams, howls, or crazy ravings. There was only silence, which gave people a feeling of unease. A sound came from the end of the passageway. Su Lu walked over and found that it was a conference room. When he saw the scene in the conference room, the expression on his face became very strange. This was because he had never thought that someone would be able to teach in a mental hospital. At the front of the conference room was a blackboard. In front of the blackboard was an extremely pale and thin middle-aged man. He was waving his arms and explaining something. The man's eye sockets were deep. The fingers holding the chalk were as thin as tree branches. They were trembling nonstop. He looked weak and dispirited, but his face and even his entire body seemed to be covered in a layer of light. Today, we're not going to talk about the Mobius strip. Professor, I've never understood why such a simple one-sided structure needs to be named with such a complicated prefix. Plus, that's too abstract. Today, we're going to talk about the ring network topology structure. The chalk quickly slid on the blackboard, drawing an extremely complicated ring topology structure. Looking at the complicated but surprisingly clear and concise lines, the dispirited man became excited as if he had taken drugs. His lips moved rapidly. The ring network topology structure is a closed topology structure. Although it's more complicated than the star configuration, it's still a very basic thing. However, if you want to know how the most advanced computer in human history works, you must first come into contact with these basic things. There were more than a dozen people sitting in the conference room. From their clothes, it was obvious that they were patients of the mental hospital. However, when they heard these professional terms, these patients nodded thoughtfully. They seemed to understand very well. The dispirited man was moved by the patient's reactions. He was moved and praised, "You are really the best students in the world. You're even better than the students in number 1 hospital." Sulu stood outside the conference room and looked at this ridiculous scene. The shock in his heart gradually disappeared and was replaced by an inexplicable sadness. He didn't want to watch anymore. He pushed open the door of the conference room and walked in. The thin, dispirited man on the podium angrily threw away the chalk and roared angrily, "Those who are late should knock on the door. Don't you know how to respect?" The voice suddenly stopped. He looked at Su Li's face and frowned. He scratched his head and rubbed his eyes. He wanted to confirm whether he had been secretly drugged yesterday, so he had hallucinations at this time. "It's me." Sulu looked at him and said, "I'm here to take you away." The man stared at him and suddenly grinned, revealing a mouth full of yellow teeth. He looked very innocent and asked, "Do you have a cigarette? I won't talk to you if you don't have one." Sulu took out a cigarette box and a lighter and handed them over. The man waved to the patients below and said, "Class is over." "Oh," the patients replied. They slowly stood up and walked out of the meeting room. Only a fat patient moved to the front of the podium. He opened his hands and asked, "Where's the candy?" The thin man with an innocent smile was smoking happily. He was very unhappy when he was suddenly interrupted. He took out a bag of candy and put it in the fat patient's hand. He said impatiently, "I now appoint you as the monitor. Take the candy and share it with them. Don't take it from me one by one like a fucking idiot." "My mother said that I'm an idiot." The fat patient looked at him seriously and corrected him. Then he raised his thick eyebrows and asked foolishly, "Can the monitor eat a few more?" "Whatever." The man waved his hand with the cigarette and then looked at the silent Sulu. He smiled and asked, "Colonel Sulu, why should I go with you?" "Biderman, you are the most talented genius I know." Sulu looked at him and said, "People like you shouldn't stay in a mental hospital." You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.